The night along the Nile does not end all at once, but slowly, gently, as if the darkness itself is reluctant to leave, and the world beneath it is in no hurry to wake, resting quietly in a silence that feels deep and endless, like a long breath held between yesterday and today. The river moves in that silence, wide and calm, carrying its water through the land with a steady, patient rhythm that has not changed for generations, its surface reflecting the fading stars that still linger in the sky, pale and distant, as though they too are slowly drifting away. Along the riverbank, small homes made of sun-dried mud bricks sit close together, their walls thick and warm, holding the memory of yesterday's heat, their flat roofs open to the sky where a few people still lie asleep, wrapped in light cloth, their breathing slow and even, their bodies at rest after a day that asked much from their hands but little from their minds. There is no sudden noise to wake them. No sharp interruption. Only the soft shift of the air, the faint rustle of palm leaves, and the almost unnoticeable change in light as the horizon begins to turn from deep blue into a quiet gray. In one of these homes, a man stirs, not because he must rise quickly, but because his body has learned the rhythm of the day so completely that it no longer needs to be told when to wake, and he opens his eyes slowly, without urgency, allowing the moment to unfold around him. For a short while, he does not move. He simply lies there, looking upward, watching the sky grow lighter, feeling the air against his skin, noticing the stillness that exists just before the world begins again. There is nothing waiting for him that feels sudden or overwhelming. His day will be like many others. And because of this, there is a quiet comfort in waking. When he finally sits up, his movements are unhurried, almost soft, as if he is careful not to disturb the calm that still lingers in the early morning, and he steps down from the roof onto the ground below, where the earth feels cool beneath his feet. Outside, the village is beginning to breathe. A few others are awake now, moving in slow, familiar ways, their actions simple and repeated, shaped by years of doing the same things in the same order, until those actions have become as natural as breathing itself. A woman steps out of her home, carrying an empty clay jar, its surface worn smooth from use, and she pauses for a moment before walking, looking toward the river as if to measure the day before it has even begun. She does not rush. No one rushes here. Time is not something that presses forward aggressively, but something that stretches, wide and open, allowing each moment to settle fully before the next one arrives. She begins her walk toward the Nile, her step steady and even, the path beneath her feet familiar enough that she does not need to think about where she is going, and along the way she passes others who are doing the same, each carrying their own jars, each moving at their own quiet pace. There are no loud greetings. No hurried exchanges. Only small nods, soft glances, and the shared understanding that the day is beginning, just as it always does. When she reaches the riverbank, the water is already glowing faintly with the early light, its surface smooth except for the gentle ripples that spread outward when touched, and she kneels carefully, lowering her jar into the water with practiced hands. Nearby, a young boy stands at the edge, holding a smaller container, though for a while he does not fill it, choosing instead to watch the movement of the river, his attention caught by the way light shifts across the surface, by the slow drifting of reeds, by the quiet, endless motion of the current. No one tells him to hurry. There is no urgency placed upon him. And so he remains there, still and observant, passing time not by doing, but by noticing. This is how many moments unfold in this place. Not filled with distraction, but with presence. The woman lifts her jar, now heavy with water, and rises carefully, balancing it with ease, her body accustomed to the weight, and she begins the walk back toward the village, where the day's work will continue in its steady, familiar rhythm. By the time she returns, the sun has begun to rise more clearly, casting a soft golden light across the homes, warming the ground, touching the walls, and slowly pushing away the last traces of night. Inside one of the homes, another woman sits near a low grinding stone, already at work, her hands moving back and forth in a slow, even motion as she crushes grain into flour, the sound of stone against stone quiet but constant, forming a rhythm that fills the space without disturbing it. She does not rush her work. There is no reason to. The grain will become flour in its own time, just as it always has. Nearby, a child sits watching her, not speaking, not fidgeting, but simply observing, her eyes following each movement carefully, as if storing the pattern in her memory, learning not through instruction, but through quiet attention. The air inside the home is still, carrying the faint scent of grain and earth, and the light that enters through the doorway is soft, illuminating the scene in a way that feels calm and unchanging. Outside, more people begin their tasks. A man kneels beside a wooden tool, shaping it with careful hands, smoothing its surface little by little, each movement controlled and patient, his focus steady, not because he is forced to concentrate, but because there is nothing else pulling his attention away. He works in silence. Not because he must, but because silence is natural. Because it belongs. This is how time moves here. Not divided into moments of work and moments of entertainment, but flowing continuously, where even labor carries a kind of quiet rhythm that fills the hours without needing anything more. As the sun rises higher, the warmth grows stronger, settling over the village like a soft weight, and the sounds of activity increase slightly, though never becoming loud, never breaking the calm that holds everything together. Voices remain low. Movements remain steady. There is no need for urgency, because the shape of the day is already known. And in this knowing, there is a kind of peace. A kind of stillness that allows time to pass gently, without resistance, without the need to escape it. The morning continues, not marked by sudden changes, but by slow shifts, the light becoming brighter, the air becoming warmer, the shadows shortening as the sun climbs higher in the sky. And through it all, the people move, work, pause, and observe, each action blending into the next, each moment flowing into another, until time itself feels less like something to be spent, and more like something to quietly live inside. As the morning settles more fully over the village, the light becomes stronger, though it never feels harsh at first, instead spreading slowly across the walls, touching each surface with a quiet warmth that seems to arrive without being noticed, as if the sun itself understands the unhurried rhythm of the people who live beneath it. The woman who carried water has now returned to her home, placing the heavy jar carefully in its place, her movements practiced and gentle, and for a brief moment she rests her hands along its cool surface, not out of necessity, but simply because the pause feels natural, like a small space between one task and the next. There is no rush to fill that space. It exists, and so she allows it to remain. Outside, the young boy who had been watching the river now walks slowly back along the same path, his small container finally filled, though not completely, because his attention had drifted more toward the movement of the water than the task itself, and no one has corrected him for it, because there is understanding here that time does not always need to be tightly held. He walks without urgency, his eyes occasionally lifting to the horizon, where the sky has now turned fully bright, the pale gold deepening into a steady light that settles over everything. Along the way, he notices small things. The pattern of footprints in the dust. The way a bird lifts suddenly into the air, then glides without effort. The quiet shifting of leaves in the faint breeze. These are not distractions. They are part of the day. Back in the village, the steady work continues, though it never feels overwhelming, because it is broken into simple, repeated actions that the body understands without strain, and so even as hands remain busy, the mind is allowed to rest in a calm, open way. The woman at the grinding stone continues her slow, rhythmic motion, the sound of stone against grain soft but constant, blending with the other quiet sounds of the morning, the distant lowing of animals, the faint murmur of voices, the occasional movement of footsteps across dry. She does not count the time. She does not measure how long the task will take. Instead, she moves with it, allowing each moment to pass as it comes, her thoughts drifting gently, not fixed on anything in particular. Nearby, the child who had been watching her now reaches out, placing her small hands on the edge of the stone, imitating the motion she has seen, though her strength is not yet enough to move it fully, and the attempt is slow, uneven. The woman notices, but she does not interrupt. She allows the child to try. To feel the weight. To understand through experience rather than instruction. And in this quiet act of imitation, time passes for both of them, not in a way that needs to be filled, but in a way that simply unfolds. Outside, the man working with wood pauses briefly, lifting his gaze from his hands, not because he is tired, but because something in the air has shifted slightly, the warmth increasing, the light changing, and he takes a moment to notice it. He sets the tool down beside him. His fingers rest loosely against his knees. For a short while, he does nothing. The pause is not empty. It is part of the rhythm. He watches as someone walks past carrying a bundle of reeds, their step steady, their shadow stretching slightly behind them, and then his gaze drifts toward the edge of the village, where the land opens wider, meeting the distant line of green that follows the Nile. There is no need to think deeply. No need to analyze. The act of seeing is enough. After a time, he returns to his work, picking up the tool once more, continuing from where he left off without hesitation, as if the pause had not interrupted anything, but had simply been another quiet movement within the flow of the day. As the sun climbs higher, the heat becomes more noticeable, though still bearable, settling into the and rising gently into the air, creating a stillness that encourages slower movements, longer pauses, and a natural easing of effort. People begin to shift their tasks accordingly. Those who were standing move to sit. Those who were working in the open step into shade. The pace of the village softens, not because work has ended, but because the day itself has changed, and the people move with it, adjusting without resistance. A group of women now sit together near the side of a home, their work lighter, their hands occupied with small tasks, repairing fabric, sorting grain, preparing for what will come later, and their voices rise and fall gently in conversation. There are moments of speaking. Then moments of silence. Neither feels more important than the other. One woman begins to share a memory, her voice calm and steady, describing something from many seasons ago, not in a dramatic way, but in a simple, flowing manner, as if the story itself is not meant to entertain, but to exist alongside the present moment. The others listen. Not with urgency. not with the need for excitement, but with a quiet attention that allows the words to settle naturally. When she finishes, there is no immediate response. Only a small pause. Then another voice begins, continuing the thread in a different direction, adding another piece, another memory, another quiet layer to the passing of time. These conversations are not performances. They are not structured. They do not seek to hold attention in a strong or demanding way. Instead, they drift, like the river itself, moving slowly, gently, without force. And in this drifting, the hours continue. Elsewhere, a child lies on his back beneath the shade of a simple covering, his arms resting loosely at his sides, his eyes half closed as he watches the shifting patterns of light above him, where the sun filters through small gaps, creating shapes that move slowly with the breeze. He follows these shapes without effort. They change, disappear, and return in new forms. There is no goal in watching them. No outcome to reach. And yet, time passes all the same. The warmth of the day deepens. The air grows heavier, encouraging stillness, encouraging rest, and gradually, more people begin to pause their work entirely, allowing themselves to lie down, to sit quietly, or simply to be without doing. This is not idleness. It is balance. The body understands when to move and when to stop, and in this place, that understanding is followed without question. A man lies in the shade, his breathing slow and even, his thoughts drifting in a quiet, unstructured way, not fixed on past or future, but simply moving as they will, like clouds that pass without needing to be held. Nearby, the soft sound of someone shifting in their seat, the faint movement of fabric, the distant call of a bird, all of these blend together into a calm, continuous background, never rising sharply, never breaking the gentle stillness that fills the space. And so, without announcement, without any clear dividing line, the morning begins to give way to midday, not through a sudden change, but through a gradual deepening of light and heat, a quiet transition that is felt more than seen. Time continues to pass. Not pushed forward. Not pulled along. But carried, gently and steadily, within the slow rhythm of a day that asks only to be lived, one moment at a time. By the time the sun reaches its highest place in the sky, the village has grown quieter than before, not empty, but softened, as if everything, people, even the air itself, has agreed to slow down together, settling into a stillness that feels natural and unforced. The light now is strong, resting heavily on the walls, pressing gently against the surfaces it touches, while the shadows have drawn in close, gathering beneath roofs, along the sides of homes, and under the few trees that offer shelter from the heat. Most movement has paused. Not entirely, but enough that the rhythm of the village feels different now, less like a flow of activity and more like a long, quiet breath held in the middle of the day. Inside one of the homes, the woman who had been grinding grain has stopped her work for a while, her hands resting loosely in her lap as she leans back slightly against the wall, her eyes half closed, not fully asleep, but no longer focused on any task. The stone sits beside her, still and silent. The grain remains unfinished. And yet, nothing feels delayed. There is no pressure to complete it quickly. The work will continue later, just as it always does. Nearby, the child who had been watching her earlier now lies stretched out on her small body relaxed, her breathing slow and even, her face calm in a way that comes easily when there is nothing expected, nothing demanded. The quiet inside the home is deep, but not empty. It holds small sounds, the faint shifting of, the distant murmur of voices from outside, the soft creak of the structure as it settles under the warmth of the day. These sounds do not disturb the stillness. They belong to it. Outside, the man who had been shaping wood now sits in the shade, his back resting lightly against the wall, his tool set aside for the time being, his hands open and relaxed, no longer occupied with careful movements. He watches the in front of him, where the light creates subtle patterns that shift almost too slowly to notice, and for a while, his gaze remains there, not searching, not thinking, simply resting. This is how the middle of the day is passed. Not with activity, but with quiet presence. Across the village, others have done the same. Some lie down fully, allowing sleep to come if it will. Others sit in silence, their thoughts moving gently, without direction. A few remain awake and observant, watching small details, the movement of an insect across the ground, the slow sway of a hanging cloth, the faint shimmer of heat rising from the. None of these moments are considered unimportant. They are part of the day, just as much as work. Time does not need to be filled with constant doing. It moves on its own. Near the edge of the village, where the land opens toward the Nile, a man sits alone beneath the thin shade of a palm, his legs stretched out before him, his arms resting loosely at his sides. From where he sits, he can see the river, though the brightness of the light makes its surface difficult to look at for long, and so he lowers his gaze slightly, letting his eyes rest on them instead. The sand is warm, almost hot, but beneath the thin layer at the surface, it remains cooler, and he presses his fingers into it absent-mindedly, feeling the difference in temperature, noticing the texture, the way it shifts and settles. There is no purpose in this action. No outcome. And yet, it occupies a moment. Then another. And another. The passing of time here is not marked by clocks or measured intervals, but by changes in light, in temperature, in the position of shadows that slowly stretch and shift as the sun continues its path across the sky. Eventually, without any clear signal, the stillness begins to change. It is subtle at first. A slight movement here. A quiet adjustment there. The air, though still warm, feels just a little lighter. The sun, though still high, has begun its slow descent. These small changes are enough. One by one, people begin to stir. The woman inside the home opens her eyes fully now, her body shifting as she straightens slightly, her hands moving again, not quickly, but with a quiet readiness, as if the pause has given her exactly what was needed. She reaches for the grinding stone once more. The sound returns. Soft. Steady. Familiar. Outside, the man lifts his tool again, turning it in his hands, examining the work he had paused earlier, and without hesitation, he resumes, the rhythm of his movements returning as naturally as breathing. There is no sense of starting over. Only continuing. Children begin to move again as well, their energy returning in small, gradual ways, not in bursts, but in quiet exploration, walking slowly through the spaces between homes, observing, touching, noticing. One child pauses beside a wall, tracing the rough surface with his fingers, feeling the texture, the slight unevenness, the warmth held within the mud brick. He follows a line with his hand, then another, as if reading something that does not need words. Nearby, Two others watch a small insect moving across the ground, their attention fixed, their bodies still, their curiosity calm and patient. They do not chase it. They do not disturb it. They simply observe. And in that observation, more time passes. As the afternoon begins to take shape, the village slowly returns to its steady rhythm of work and movement, though now softened by the lingering calm of midday, as if the stillness has settled into everything, remaining even as activity resumes. Voices return, but remain gentle. Footsteps increase, but never rush. The flow of the day continues, smooth and unbroken. A group of men walk toward the fields beyond the village, their tools carried easily, their steps even, their conversation quiet and spaced with long pauses, where silence fills the space between words without discomfort. They do not speak to pass time. They allow time to pass as they speak. The land beyond the village stretches outward, shaped by the river's presence, its soil darker and richer, its surface marked by the careful work of those who tend it season after season. Here, too, the rhythm is steady. Measured not by urgency, but by repetition. By familiarity. By the understanding that each action connects to another, forming a pattern that continues day after day. Back within the village, the women continue their tasks, the grinding, the preparing, the mending, their movements quiet but constant, their conversations drifting in and out, never demanding attention, never needing to hold it. The child who had been lying beneath the shade now sits up, rubbing his eyes slowly, his gaze unfocused for a moment before it settles, and he looks around, taking in the familiar shapes of the people, the light. Nothing has changed in a sudden way. Everything has simply continued. And in that continuity, there is comfort. The afternoon stretches ahead, not as something to be filled, but as something already full in its own quiet way, carrying with it the same gentle rhythm, the same slow unfolding of moments that ask for nothing more than to be lived. And so, once again, time passes. Not loudly. Not quickly. But in the same calm, steady manner, like the river itself, moving forward without ever seeming to hurry. As the afternoon continues to unfold, the light begins to soften almost without notice, shifting from its earlier brightness into something warmer and more gentle, as if the sun itself is slowly easing its hold on the land, allowing the edges of things to blur slightly, the sharpness of midday giving way to a calmer, more forgiving glow. The air, though still warm, feels easier to breathe now. A faint breeze returns, moving quietly through the village, brushing against walls, passing through open doorways, stirring the edges of cloth and palm leaves in a way that feels soft and unintrusive, like a quiet reminder that the day is slowly changing. People continue their work, but there is a subtle difference in their movements now, a slight lightness, as if the weight of the heat has lifted just enough to allow a deeper breath, a slower exhale, a more relaxed rhythm in the body. The man in the fields pauses, straightening his back as he looks out across the land, his gaze traveling over the that stretches before him, marked by careful lines and small signs of labor, each one familiar, each one part of a pattern he knows without needing to think about it. He rests his hands at his sides for a moment, letting them hang loosely, feeling the air move across his skin, and in that pause, he does not think of what remains to be done, but simply notices where he is, standing between what has already been completed and what will come next. Nearby, another man continues his work, his movement steady, his attention focused, yet even within that focus there is no tension, only a quiet consistency, as if his body has learned to move in harmony with the passing hours rather than against them. Back in the village, the sound of grinding stone has become less frequent now, replaced by lighter tasks, by preparation for the evening that will slowly arrive, though no one speaks of it directly, because there is no need to announce what is already understood. A woman sits near the entrance of her home, shaping dough once more, her hands pressing and turning it with gentle care, each motion smooth and practiced, her attention resting fully in the movement itself. The child beside her watches again, though now with a softer gaze, her earlier curiosity settling into quiet familiarity, as if the repeated act has become something known, something expected, something that no longer needs to be studied closely. And still, she watches. Because watching itself is part of being here. A little further away, a group of children move slowly along the edge of the village, their steps uncoordinated but unhurried, their attention shifting from one small thing to another, the shape of a stone, the path of an insect, the faint markings left in the dust by someone who passed earlier. They do not run. They do not shout. Their movements are gentle, almost quiet, as if they too are shaped by the calm that surrounds them, learning without being told that time does not need to be chased. One of them bends down, picking up a small object from the ground, turning it over in his hand, examining it closely, not because it holds great value, but because it is something to notice, something to hold for a moment before setting it down again. This, too, is a way of passing time. Not through structured play, but through simple attention. As the sun lowers further, the shadows begin to stretch once again, lengthening slowly across reaching toward one another, blending together in soft, shifting patterns that move almost too slowly to see. The light grows deeper, warmer, touching the walls of the homes with a soft glow that lingers, as if reluctant to leave. People begin to return from the fields, their steps steady, their bodies carrying the quiet tiredness of work that has been done without strain, their tools resting easily in their hands or across their shoulders. There is no loud return. No sudden gathering. They arrive as they always do, gradually, one by one, slipping back into the spaces of the village as naturally as they had left them. Some pause outside their homes, standing for a moment before entering, looking around as if taking in the familiar sight with quiet appreciation, though they would not name it as such. It is simply a moment. And then it passes. Inside, preparations for the evening meal begin, though even this is done without urgency, the actions unfolding at a steady pace, guided more by habit than by any need to hurry. The woman who had shaped the dough now places it onto a heated surface, watching as it begins to change, its form shifting slightly, its surface warming, the scent slowly rising into the air, subtle at first, then gradually more noticeable. Nearby, someone arranges simple items, grain, perhaps a few vegetables, whatever is available, each movement quiet, each action part of a sequence that has been repeated many times before. There is comfort in this repetition. A sense of knowing what comes next without needing to think about it. Outside, the breeze continues, slightly stronger now, carrying with it the faint scent of the river, of the day itself as it begins to settle into evening. A man sits near the doorway of his home, his work finished for now, his hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze directed outward, not fixed on anything in particular, but open, allowing whatever passes before him to be seen without effort. He watches as a child walks slowly across the open space, as another sits nearby tracing patterns in the dust with a small stick, as someone adjusts a cloth hanging in the doorway. Each movement is small, each moment quiet. And yet, together, they fill the space in a way that feels complete. There is no absence here. No need for something more. As the light continues to fade, voices become slightly more present, though still gentle, still measured, rising and falling in soft conversation as people gather closer to their homes, sharing the space, the air, the final hours of the day. These conversations are not hurried. They are not filled with urgency. They move slowly, with pauses that are just as important as the words themselves, allowing each thought to settle before the next one arrives. A woman speaks softly, her voice calm, her words simple, describing something that happened earlier in the day, and another listens, nodding slightly, not interrupting, not needing to respond immediately. The exchange is unforced, natural, like the rest of the day. Nearby, a child leans against the wall, his eyes growing heavier, his body relaxing as the energy of the afternoon fades, his attention drifting, no longer fixed on the small things that had held it before. The day is nearing its end. Not suddenly, but slowly, as everything here does. The sky begins to change again, the bright warmth of the afternoon giving way to softer tones, the blue deepening, the light thinning, as if it is being gently drawn away. And in this quiet transition, the village settles once more, preparing not through deliberate action, but through the natural slowing of movement, the softening of voices, the gradual return to stillness. Time continues, just as it has all day. Not rushed, not resisted, but allowed to move, gently and steadily, carrying everyone with it toward the calm of evening. As evening begins to settle more fully over the village, the light softens into a quiet glow that rests gently on the walls, and the faces of those who remain outside, as if the day is slowly releasing its hold, allowing everything to ease into a slower, more peaceful rhythm. The sun lowers toward the horizon, its warmth no longer heavy, but comforting, spreading across the land in long, quiet rays that stretch and fade as they touch the edges of things, leaving behind a calm that feels deeper than the stillness of midday. The breeze continues, slightly cooler now, moving through the village in a way that feels almost like a quiet presence, brushing against skin, shifting loose strands of fabric, carrying with it the faint scent of the river and the earth that has been warmed throughout the day. People gather closer to their homes. Not in large groups, not in loud conversation, but in small, natural clusters, where the space between them is filled with a quiet understanding rather than the need for constant speech. The evening meal is prepared in the same steady way as everything else, without urgency, without noise, each step unfolding calmly, guided by habit and familiarity rather than by thought. The woman who had been working with the dough now tends to it as it finishes, turning it gently, watching its surface change, her attention soft but present, her movements slow and careful, as if each action is part of a rhythm she has followed for many years. Nearby, others prepare simple additions, arranging what they have, not with concern for variety or complexity, but with quiet acceptance of what is available, what is enough. Children sit or stand close by, their earlier movement now settled into stillness, their bodies relaxed, their energy fading naturally with the light of the day. One child leans against a wall, his eyes half closed, listening to the soft sounds around him, the low voices, the faint crackle of heat, the movement of someone shifting nearby, and without realizing it, he begins to drift closer to sleep. The sounds of the village in the evening are gentle. Nothing rises sharply. nothing breaks the calm. A voice here, quiet and steady. A movement there, soft and unhurried. The faint sound of being handled, of hands moving, of objects placed and adjusted. All of it blends together into a single, continuous layer of sound that feels as natural as itself. A man sits just outside his home, his back resting lightly against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his gaze directed toward the open space of the village, though he is not focused on anything in particular. He watches as people move in small ways, as shadows lengthen and soften, as the light continues to fade, and in his stillness, there is no restlessness, no sense that something is missing. The day has been full. Not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that feels complete. When the food is ready, it is shared simply, without ceremony, without structure, each person taking what they need, sitting where they are comfortable, eating slowly, without distraction. There is no hurry even in this. Each bite is taken calmly. Each moment allowed to remain. Conversation continues, though softly, never rising above the quiet tone that has carried through the entire day, words spoken in a way that feels almost like an extension of thought rather than an effort to fill silence. Sometimes there are pauses between sentences. Long ones. And no one feels the need to break them. The sky above begins to deepen, the last light of the sun slipping away, leaving behind a softer, dimmer glow that slowly gives way to the first signs of night. A single star appears. Then another. And then more, spreading gradually across the sky, just as they did the night before, and the night before that, unchanged, steady, always returning. Some people begin to lie down, either inside their homes or upon the flat roofs above, where the air is cooler and the sky is open, stretching endlessly overhead. Others remain seated for a while longer, their bodies relaxed, their voices quiet, their presence calm. A woman finishes her meal and sets aside what remains, her hands moving slowly, without urgency, as she arranges things in their place, her attention gentle, her movements soft. When she is done, she does not immediately rise. She sits for a moment. Still. Looking outward, though not at anything specific, allowing the quiet of the evening to settle fully around her. Nearby, the man who had been sitting outside now leans his head back slightly, his gaze lifting toward the sky, where the stars have become more visible, their light small but steady, their presence constant. He watches them without counting, without searching for patterns, simply allowing his eyes to rest upon them, his breathing slow, his body at ease. This is how the evening passes. Not through planned activity. Not through entertainment. But through quiet presence, shared space, gentle observation. A child, now fully asleep, lies curled beside the wall, his breathing soft, his body still, the day having carried him naturally into rest without resistance. Others follow, one by one, their conversations fading, their movements slowing, until the village begins to return to the same stillness from which it had awakened. The sounds grow fewer. The voices soften, then fall silent. The breeze continues, though even it feels quieter now, as if it too is settling into rest. Above, the sky is fully dark, filled with stars that shine clearly, uninterrupted by any artificial light, their presence vast and calm, stretching beyond what can be seen or understood. On the rooftops, figures lie beneath this sky, their bodies relaxed, their thoughts drifting, no longer held by the tasks of the day, no longer moving with purpose, but simply existing in the quiet space between wakefulness and sleep. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to fill. The day has come to its natural end. And in this ending, there is no sharp boundary, no sudden stop, only a gentle fading, as the world becomes softer, quieter, more still. Time continues, even here. But it moves differently now. Slower. Quieter. Almost unnoticed. Until, without effort, without awareness, sleep arrives once more, carrying the village into the deep, calm silence of the night, where everything rests, and nothing is required, and the steady rhythm of life continues, unseen, waiting patiently for the next gentle morning to begin again. The night deepens, not in a sudden way, but in slow and quiet layers, as if the darkness is gently settling over everything, covering the homes, the river, and the people with a calm that feels complete and undisturbed. The village, now at rest, holds a silence that is not empty, but full in its own quiet way, carrying small, soft sounds that exist without drawing attention, the faint movement of someone turning in their sleep, the distant ripple of the Nile as it continues its steady flow, the gentle whisper of the breeze passing through narrow spaces and over open roofs. Above, the sky stretches wide and endless, filled with stars that shine with a steady, unwavering light, their presence constant, their quiet glow touching everything below without ever changing. On one of the rooftops, the man who had been watching the sky earlier now sleeps, his body still, his breathing slow and even, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his face calm in a way that reflects the stillness around him. There are no restless thoughts here. No interruptions. Only the deep, steady rhythm of rest. Nearby, another figure lies awake for a little while longer, not because of worry, but simply because sleep has not yet fully come, and so he watches the sky in silence, his gaze moving slowly across the stars, not searching for meaning, but simply noticing their presence. His breathing matches the quiet around him. Slow. Even. Unforced. And in that stillness, time continues to pass, though it feels almost as if it has paused, as if the night itself is holding everything gently in place. Eventually, his eyes close. Not suddenly, but gradually, as if the darkness itself has drawn them shut, and sleep takes him without effort, carrying him into the same calm rest that holds the entire village. Hours pass. Uncounted. Unmeasured. The night remains steady, its quiet uninterrupted, its rhythm unchanged. The river continues to move. The air continues to shift. The stars continue their slow journey across the sky. And beneath all of it, life rests. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the darkness begins to ease. Not yet replaced by light, but softened, as if the edges of night are gently fading, making space for the return of morning. The stars grow fainter. One by one. Until only a few remain visible against the slowly brightening sky. The air feels cooler now, carrying a freshness that belongs only to this early moment, before the warmth of the day returns. On the rooftops, the first movements begin again. A shift. A quiet breath. The slow opening of eyes. The man who had slept beneath the sky stirs once more, his body waking in the same unhurried way as before, his awareness returning gradually, without any sense of urgency. He does not rise immediately. Instead, he remains where he is for a short time, looking upward, watching as the sky changes, as the soft gray of dawn begins to take shape. There is a familiarity in this moment. A quiet recognition. This has happened many times before. And it will happen again. Eventually, he sits up, his movement slow, his body adjusting naturally to the waking day, and he looks out across the village, where others are beginning to stir as well, their forms moving gently in the early light. There is no signal that tells them to wake. No sound that calls them. Only the steady rhythm of life, guiding them forward, just as it did the day before. A woman steps out from her home, the same clay jar in her hands, its surface cool in the morning air, and she pauses once more, just as she did before, looking toward the river, her gaze calm, her thoughts quiet. The day begins again. Not as something new, but as a continuation. She walks along the familiar path, her steps steady, her body moving with ease, and as she approaches the Nile, she sees others already there, their forms reflected faintly in the water, their movements slow and quiet. The river flows as it always has. Unchanged. Steady. Endless. She kneels, lowering the jar into the water, watching as it fills, the surface rippling outward in soft circles, the light of the early sky reflecting in shifting patterns. Nearby, the young boy stands once more at the edge, his small container in his hands, though again, his attention is not fixed entirely on the task. He watches the water, the movement, the light, the small details that change from moment to moment. And just as before, no one rushes him. No one calls him away. Because this, too, is part of the day. Part of how time passes. The village slowly fills with movement again, though it remains gentle, steady, unhurried, as if the entire place is waking in one long, continuous motion, rather than in separate, sudden acts. The woman returns with her jar. The man steps down from the roof. Others begin their tasks. And just like that, without any clear beginning, the day has started once more. The same rhythms return. The same movements. The same quiet patterns of work, rest, and observation. But they do not feel repetitive in a way that is tiring. They feel stable, reliable. Like the river that continues to flow beside them, never rushing, never stopping, always moving forward in the same calm, steady way. Inside the homes, the grinding stones begin again. Outside, tools are lifted once more. Children sit, watch, wander, and notice. The light grows stronger. The warmth returns. And time continues to pass, not as something that must be filled or escaped, but as something that exists fully in each moment, carried gently within the simple, steady rhythm of a life that does not seek distraction, but instead finds quiet meaning in the flow of each ordinary day. The new morning does not feel separate from the one before it, but instead seems to rise out of the night as part of the same long, unbroken rhythm, where each day gently folds into the next, carrying with it the same quiet patterns, the same familiar movements, and the same calm understanding that time will continue, whether it is noticed or not. The light spreads slowly once more, touching the walls, and the narrow paths between the homes, revealing again the small details that had disappeared into the darkness, the faint footprints in the dust, the edges of tools left where they were set down, the soft lines of fabric resting against doorways. Nothing feels new. And yet, nothing feels old. Everything simply continues. The woman who returned from the river places her jar in its usual spot, her hand steady, her movements unthinking, shaped by repetition that no longer requires effort, and after setting it down, she pauses briefly, as she often does, allowing a moment of stillness before beginning what comes next. This pause is small, but it is present. And in that presence, time moves quietly forward. Inside another home, the grinding stone begins its slow rhythm once again, the sound soft but steady, marking the passing of the early hours without needing to be counted, and the woman who works there leans slightly into the motion, her body aligned with the task, her thoughts calm and unhurried. The child beside her watches again, though now her attention drifts more easily, moving between the movement of the stone and the light that enters through the doorway, creating shifting shapes on the that seem to move without sound. She follows these shapes with her eyes, not because she is told to, but because they're there. And because noticing them is enough. Outside, the man who had shaped wood the day before sits once more near the entrance of his home, the unfinished tool in his hands, and without hesitation, he continues from where he left off, his fingers moving with quiet precision, his attention steady but relaxed. There is no need to begin again. There is only continuing. Around him, the village moves gently into the morning, each person finding their place within the rhythm, not by planning, but by simply following what has always been done. A group of women walk together toward the river, their jars balanced with ease, their steps even, their conversation soft and spaced with long pauses, where silence fills the space between words without discomfort. They speak quietly, sharing small thoughts, small observations, nothing urgent, nothing demanding attention, and when their words fade, the silence that follows feels just as natural. The path beneath their feet remains the same. The river ahead remains the same. And in this sameness, there is a quiet sense of ease. Near the edge of the village, a child crouches close to watching as a small line of ants moves steadily along a narrow path, each one following the other in a pattern that seems endless. He leans closer, his face calm, his eyes focused, not with excitement, but with a gentle curiosity that does not rush or demand answers. The ants continue their movement, unaffected by his presence. And he continues to watch. This moment stretches. Quiet. Simple. Unbroken. And in it, time passes just as fully as it does in any task or conversation. As the sun rises higher, the warmth begins to return, settling slowly over the village, touching each surface, each movement, each breath, and the pace of activity adjusts once again, not through decision, but through feeling. The woman at the grinding stone shifts slightly, her movements slowing just enough to match the growing warmth, her breathing steady, her attention still present, though softer now, less focused on the task itself and more on the rhythm it creates. Outside, the man pauses again, his hands resting, his gaze lifting toward the horizon, where the light has become brighter, clearer, and for a moment, he does nothing. This pause, like all the others, is not empty. It is part of the flow. Children move quietly between spaces, their steps light, their attention wandering from one small detail to another, not guided by instruction, but by what draws their eyes in the moment. One child traces a line in the dust with a small stick, watching as the mark appears and remains, then fades slightly as the wind brushes over it. Another sits nearby, turning a small stone over in his hand, feeling its surface, its weight, its shape, as if each of these qualities holds something worth noticing. There are no games designed for them. No objects made for play. And yet, they are not without occupation. The world itself provides enough. As the morning continues, the sounds of the village blend together once more into a soft, steady layer, the grinding of stone, the movement of feet, the faint murmur of voices, the occasional call of an animal in the distance. None of these sounds rise sharply. None interrupt the calm. They exist together, forming a quiet background that carries the day forward. A man walks slowly along the edge of the village, his steps unhurried, his hands empty for the moment, and as he moves, his gaze shifts gently from one place to another, not searching, not focusing, but simply observing what is around him. He notices the texture of the beneath his feet, the way the light falls across the walls, the small movements of others as they go about their tasks. And in this noticing, he passes the time without effort. The sun climbs higher. The shadows shorten. The warmth deepens. And once again, the day begins to move toward its middle, not through any sudden change, but through the same slow, steady progression that has guided every moment so far. The rhythm continues. Unbroken. Unforced. Carrying each person gently from one moment to the next, where time does not need to be filled with distraction, but instead unfolds naturally, quietly, within the simple, repeated patterns of a life that moves at its own calm and steady pace. As the morning gradually leans toward midday once again, the light becomes fuller, settling more firmly over the village, while the grows warmer in a way that is familiar and expected, as if the day itself is following a path that has already been walked many times before. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels delayed. Everything moves forward at the same quiet, steady pace. The woman at the grinding stone continues her work, though her movements now carry a slightly slower rhythm, shaped not by effort, but by the gentle weight of the rising heat, and she adjusts without thinking, allowing her hands to follow a pace that feels natural to her body. The child beside her has shifted position, now lying on her side, her head resting lightly against her arm, her eyes moving lazily between the motion of the stone and the patterns of light that drift across the. Her attention no longer holds tightly to one thing. It drifts. And in that drifting, time continues to pass. Outside, the man who had been shaping wood places his tool down once more, his hands resting loosely, his fingers slightly curved as if still holding the shape of what he had been working on, and he leans back just enough to feel the wall behind him. His eyes close briefly. Not in sleep, but in rest. The warmth of the day encourages stillness, and he follows it without resistance, allowing his body to pause when it needs to, trusting that the work will continue later, just as it always does. Across the village, others do the same. The pace softens. Movements grow fewer. Voices quiet further. A natural stillness begins to spread, not all at once, but gradually, like a shadow that slowly extends across the. Near the river, fewer people remain now, as most have already gathered what they need for the day, and the water continues its steady flow, untouched by the quiet shift in human activity, moving as it always has, constant and unchanging. A man stands for a moment at its edge, looking out across the surface, his gaze calm, his thoughts unformed, and after a short while, he turns and walks back toward the village, his steps slow, his presence quiet. There is nothing more to do here for now. Back among the homes, a woman sits beneath a shaded covering, her hands occupied with a small piece of fabric, repairing a tear with careful, patient movements, each stitch placed without hurry, each motion steady and precise. She does not look up often. Her focus remains gentle, not intense, as if the act itself is enough to hold her attention without effort. Nearby, another sits beside her, not working at the moment, but simply resting, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her gaze directed outward, watching the open space between the homes where the light now feels heavier. They do not speak. But the silence between them is comfortable. Shared. Time passes here, not through conversation, but through presence. A child walks slowly across the open ground, his steps leaving faint marks in the dust, which remain for a short while before softening under the movement of, and he watches this happen, noticing how quickly it returns to its smooth, undisturbed surface. He pauses. Then steps again. Then pauses once more, as if testing how long each mark will remain. This simple act holds his attention. And in that attention, moments stretch quietly. As the sun continues to climb, the deepens, settling more fully over everything, encouraging a wider stillness to take hold, and gradually, people begin to withdraw from activity almost entirely, moving into shade, into their homes, or onto the where the air feels just slightly cooler. The village grows quieter. Not empty, but hushed. Inside one home, the woman who had been working with fabric sets it aside, her hands coming to rest, her body leaning back against the wall, her eyes softening as she allows herself to pause fully. The faint sound of breathing fills the space. Slow. Even. Unbroken. Nearby, the child has now closed her eyes completely, her body relaxed, her earlier movements replaced by stillness, as sleep arrives naturally, without effort, without resistance. Outside, the man who had been resting against the wall now lies down fully, stretching out along the shaded ground, his arm placed beneath his head, his body settling into a position of ease. He does not think of the time. He does not measure the length of his rest. He simply allows it. This is how the middle of the day begins again. Not marked by a clear moment, but by a gradual surrender to stillness. The sounds of the village fade even further, leaving only the softest traces, the distant call of a bird, the faint movement of, the almost silent presence of others resting nearby. Even the animals seem to move less, seeking shade, lowering their heads, their energy quieted by the warmth. The light remains strong, but it feels distant now, as if it exists above everything without pressing too closely, leaving the shaded spaces calm and still. A man sits alone near the edge of the village, his back against a low wall, his gaze unfocused, his thoughts drifting slowly, without direction, without urgency. He notices the way the air feels against his skin. The way the light shifts slightly as time moves. The way his own breathing rises and falls. Nothing more. And nothing less. This moment, like all the others, is complete in itself. There is no need to add anything to it. No need to escape it. The day continues. Quietly. Gently. Carrying everyone once more into the deep, restful stillness of midday, where time no longer feels like something that must be used, but something that simply exists, wide and open, allowing each person to rest within it without effort, without expectation, without end. The stillness of midday settles more deeply now, spreading across the village like a quiet, invisible layer, softening every movement, every sound, every thought, until even the smallest actions feel slower, as if time itself has stretched wider, allowing each moment to rest more fully before giving way to the next. The light remains strong above, but within the shaded spaces, it feels distant, filtered, gentle in a way that allows the eyes to relax, the body to soften, and the mind to drift without direction. Inside the homes, many now rest completely. Some lie on their sides, their breathing slow and even, their bodies still, carried gently into sleep without effort, as naturally as the night had taken them before. Others remain awake, though quiet, their eyes half closed, their thoughts moving slowly, without urgency, without focus, like the soft movement of air that passes unnoticed unless one chooses to feel it. The woman who had been grinding grain earlier now sits in this quiet pause, her hands resting loosely, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze lowered, not fixed on anything in particular, simply allowing the stillness to exist around her. The grinding stone remains untouched beside her. Its work will continue later. There is no need to think about it now. Nearby, the child sleeps, her small body curled slightly, her face calm, her breathing soft and steady, her rest uninterrupted by noise or movement, as if the entire village has agreed to hold its quiet for her. Outside, the man who had stretched out beneath the shade remains in the same position, his eyes now closed, his breathing deep, his body fully surrendered to rest, not in a heavy way, but in a light, natural way, as though he is simply part of the stillness itself. Around him, others sit or lie in similar calm, each person finding their own place within the quiet, each body adjusting without thought, following the gentle rhythm that the day has set. There are no voices now, or only the faintest traces of them, distant and soft, blending into the background so completely that they do not disturb the calm. The animals, too, remain still. A goat rests beneath a narrow strip of shade, its head lowered, its body unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of breath. A bird perches silently, its feathers unmoving in the warm air. Even the insects seem quieter, their movement slower, less noticeable. The entire world feels as though it has paused, not stopped, but softened, like a long, quiet exhale that continues without end. Near the edge of the village, the Nile flows as it always does, steady and unchanged, its surface reflecting the brightness of the sky, though few are there now to watch it, as most have withdrawn into the cooler spaces, leaving the river to move quietly on its own. A single figure sits near the water, his form still, his gaze lowered toward the rather than the bright surface of the river, his hands resting loosely in the sand beside him. He moves his fingers slowly, feeling the texture beneath them, the warmth at the surface, the cooler layer just below, his attention resting in these small details without any need to think beyond them. He does not measure how long he sits there. He does not count the passing moments. Time moves, whether he notices or not. And so he allows it to move without holding it. Back within the village, the air remains heavy but calm, the warmth steady, not harsh, but present enough to encourage stillness, to guide the body toward rest, to quiet the mind in a way that feels natural and complete. A woman shifts slightly where she sits, adjusting her position, her movement slow and gentle, careful not to disturb the calm that surrounds her, and once settled, she becomes still again, her breathing steady, her thoughts quiet. There is no impatience in this moment. No sense of waiting for something to begin. This is not a pause between important events. This is part of the day itself. The middle of it. Full and complete in its stillness. Time continues to pass, though it feels almost as if it has become softer, less defined, as if the edges of each moment have blurred into one another, creating a long, continuous stretch that flows without interruption. The light above begins, very slowly, to change. It is almost unnoticeable at first. A slight shift. A subtle softening. But it is there. The sun has begun its quiet descent. The remains, but its weight begins to ease, just slightly, enough that the air feels different, though not yet cooler, just less still. This change moves gently through the village, touching each space, each body, each breath, and though no one speaks of it, it is felt. The man near the river opens his eyes fully now, his gaze lifting slightly, his attention returning more clearly to the world around him, and after a while, he pushes himself up slowly, brushing the sand from his hands without hurry. He stands for a moment. Still. Then turns back toward the village. Elsewhere, others begin to stir as well, small movements returning, an arm shifting, a head lifting, eyes opening slowly, as if waking from a rest that was never fully sleep, but something lighter, something quieter. The woman inside the home straightens slightly, her hands moving once more, not immediately returning to work, but adjusting, preparing, as if her body is remembering its place within the rhythm of the day. The child beside her remains asleep for a little while longer, undisturbed by the gentle return of movement around her. Outside, the man who had been lying down sits up slowly, his posture relaxed, his gaze unfocused for a moment before settling, and he takes a slow breath, as if marking the quiet shift from stillness back into motion. No one rushes to begin again. There is no sudden return to activity. Only a gradual unfolding, as the village moves gently out of its deep midday rest and into the softer rhythm of the afternoon. The sounds return, but quietly. A soft movement here. A faint voice there. The beginning of footsteps once more across the day continues, just as it has before. Carried forward not by urgency, but by the same calm, steady flow that has guided every moment, where time does not demand to be filled, but simply moves, gently and endlessly, through the lives of those who live within it. The quiet return from midday rest does not happen all at once, but slowly, like the soft reappearance of sound after a long silence, where each small movement feels gentle and unforced, as if the village itself is waking from a deep, shared breath. The light has begun to change, though it is still bright, now carrying a warmth that feels less heavy, less pressing, and more open, as if itself has been given a little more space to move. One by one, people begin to rise more fully. Not quickly. Not with sudden energy. But with a calm readiness, their bodies adjusting naturally, as if they have been quietly preparing for this moment without needing to think about it. Inside the homes, figures shift from resting positions, sitting up slowly, stretching their arms or adjusting their posture, their eyes opening fully, though still soft, still relaxed, not yet focused on any task. The woman who had been sitting beside the grinding stone now reaches toward it again, her fingers resting lightly on its surface before she begins, not immediately, but after a short pause, allowing herself a moment to settle back into movement. When she does begin, the sound returns. Soft. Steady. Familiar. It does not break the quiet. It becomes part of it. Nearby, the child who had been asleep stirs gently, her body shifting as she wakes, her eyes opening slowly, blinking against the softened light that enters the space, and for a moment she remains still, adjusting to the return of awareness. There is no rush to stand. No call to begin anything. She simply lies there, feeling the warmth, the quiet, the presence of others moving softly around her. Outside, the man who had rested beneath the shade now stands fully, brushing the last traces of dust from his clothing, his movements unhurried, his posture relaxed, as if even standing requires no effort at all. He looks around briefly, not searching for anything specific, but noticing what is there, the shifting light, the slow movement of others, the gentle return of sound, and then, without hesitation, he steps forward, rejoining the quiet flow of the day. The afternoon begins to take shape once more. Not as something new, but as a continuation. People return to their tasks, though the pace remains softer than in the early morning, shaped by the lingering calm of rest, carried forward with a quiet steadiness that feels natural and unforced. A group of men walk again toward the fields, their tools resting lightly in their hands, their steps even, their conversation minimal, existing in short exchanges followed by long stretches of silence that feel complete on their own. They do not speak to fill the space. They allow the space to exist. Near the homes, women continue their work, preparing, repairing, arranging, their hands moving with quiet familiarity, their attention steady but relaxed, as if each action flows directly into the next without interruption. A woman lifts a piece of fabric, examining it in the light, her fingers tracing along its edge, feeling for what needs to be adjusted, and after a moment, she begins again, her movements small and precise. Nearby, another tends to food that will be needed later, her actions slow, deliberate, guided not by time, but by habit. Children begin to move more again, though still gently, their steps light, their attention wandering in the same quiet way as before, drawn not to loud or sudden things, but to the small details that surround them. One child follows the shadow of a wall as it stretches slowly across stepping into it, then out again, noticing the difference in warmth beneath his feet, his movements calm, his curiosity steady. Another sits nearby, drawing simple shapes into the dust with a stick, watching how the lines remain, then fade slightly as the air brushes over them. These small actions hold their attention fully. Not because they are exciting, but because they are present. And in that presence, time continues to pass. The breeze moves more freely now, passing through the village in soft currents that lift the edges of cloth, stir the dust lightly, and carry with them the faint scent of the river, reminding those who feel it of the steady flow that continues just beyond the edge of sight. A man pauses as the breeze touches his face, his eyes closing briefly, his breath slowing, as if the moment itself is enough to hold him still for a short while. Then, just as gently, he moves again. Nothing is held. Nothing is forced. Everything flows. The light continues to soften as the sun begins its slow descent, though it is still high enough to cast a steady glow across the village, illuminating the simple shapes of homes, the narrow paths, the quiet figures moving within them. The sounds remain low. A steady background of soft movement, faint voices, the occasional sound of tools, of hands at work. Nothing sharp. Nothing sudden. The day carries on in the same calm, continuous rhythm, where each moment blends into the next, where time is not divided into separate pieces, but experienced as a single, flowing presence. A man walks slowly along the edge of the village once more, his gaze drifting, his attention light, and as he moves, he notices the same things he has seen before, the beneath his feet, the walls beside him, the distant line of green that marks the river's path. And yet, each time, it feels enough. Because it is not the newness that matters, but the noticing itself. As the afternoon continues, the village remains in this gentle state of motion, not fully active, not fully still, but balanced between the two, carried forward by the quiet understanding that the day will move as it always does, without needing to be pushed. And so, once again, time passes. Softly. Steadily. Unnoticed by those who live within it, yet always present, always moving, like the Nile itself, flowing forward without effort, without urgency, without end. The afternoon continues to settle into itself, not as a separate part of the day, but as a gentle extension of everything that has already come before, where the rhythm remains steady, and each moment flows quietly into the next without interruption or strain. The light begins to soften further now, though it still fills the village, resting along the walls and in a way that feels warm but no longer heavy, as if the sun has begun to ease its presence, allowing the air to move more freely, allowing the body to breathe more deeply. The breeze returns again, slightly more noticeable than before, moving through the open spaces between homes, brushing against fabric, carrying faint scents that linger from the day, the earth, the river, the quiet traces of work that have already been done. People continue their tasks, though now their movements feel lighter, as if the weight of the day has shifted, making each action easier, each step softer, each breath more open. The man in the fields pauses once more, standing still as he looks out across the land, his hands resting at his sides, his chest rising and falling slowly, his gaze calm and steady. He does not think about the time. He does not measure how much remains. He simply stands. And in that standing, time continues to move. Nearby, another man adjusts his grip on a tool, his hands steady, his movements deliberate but unhurried, as if each action is guided not by urgency, but by a quiet understanding of what needs to be done. There is no tension. No rush. Only continuation. Back in the village, a woman sits near the doorway of her home, her hands working slowly with a small object, perhaps shaping, perhaps repairing, her fingers moving with a soft rhythm that mirrors the steady flow of the day. She glances up occasionally, her eyes drifting toward the open space before her, watching as others pass by in quiet motion, then returning her attention to the task in her hands without any sense of interruption. Nearby, two children sit close together, their heads tilted slightly as they watch something small on the ground, a tiny movement, perhaps an insect or a shifting grain of dust carried by the breeze, and they remain still, their attention gentle, their curiosity calm. They do not speak. They do not reach out. They simply watch. And in that watching, time stretches. Elsewhere, a group of women sit together again, their work lighter now, their hands occupied with simple tasks that do not demand full attention, allowing their conversation to move slowly between them, rising and falling in soft tones that blend easily with the quiet around them. One voice speaks, describing something simple, something from earlier in the day, and another listens, her expression calm, her presence steady, before responding in the same quiet way. There are pauses. Long ones. And within those pauses, nothing feels missing. The silence holds its place naturally, as if it is part of the conversation itself. A child nearby leans back against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his eyes half closed as he listens without focusing, his awareness drifting between the voices and the soft movement of the breeze. The afternoon continues its slow movement toward evening, though no one marks the change, no one speaks of it directly, because it does not need to be named to be felt. The shadows grow longer. The light deepens. The air cools, just slightly. These small shifts move quietly through the village, touching each space, each person, each moment, guiding the day forward without resistance. A man returns from the fields, his step steady, his body carrying the quiet fatigue of work that has been done with care, his tools resting easily in his hands. He walks through the village without drawing attention, his presence blending into the calm that surrounds him, and as he reaches his home, he pauses briefly at the entrance, standing still for a moment before stepping inside. This pause is small, but it is part of the rhythm. Inside, he sets his tools down gently, his hands releasing them without sound, and he sits for a moment, his body adjusting, his breathing steady, his gaze unfocused as he allows himself to transition from movement into rest. Outside, the breeze continues to move, carrying with it the quiet signs of the day's turning, the sense that something is slowly shifting, though nothing has yet changed in a way that can be clearly seen. Children move a little more now, their energy returning in small, gentle ways, their steps still unhurried, their voices still soft, as if they too feel the quiet transition that is taking place. One child walks along the edge of a wall, placing each foot carefully, balancing without effort, his arms slightly extended, his attention focused but calm. Another follows the movement of a shadow across stepping into it, then out again, noticing how it stretches and changes as the light lowers. These small acts fill their time completely. Not because they are designed to do so, but because they exist. The woman near the doorway finishes her task, setting it aside with a soft motion, and for a moment, she does nothing. Her hands rest in her lap. Her gaze lifts outward. She breathes. And in that stillness, the afternoon continues to pass. The sounds of the village remain soft and steady, a quiet blend of movement and presence that carries through every space, never rising, never breaking the calm. The light continues to fade slowly, though still present, still warm, now casting a gentle glow that feels closer to evening than to day. And in this slow, unmarked transition, time moves forward once more, not with urgency, not with demand, but with the same calm, steady flow that has guided every moment, carrying the village gently toward the quiet, familiar arrival of evening. The afternoon leans quietly toward evening, and though no clear moment marks the change, it can be felt in the way the light softens further, in the way that begins to cool just slightly, and in the way the movements of the people grow even more gentle, as if the entire village is slowly easing into a calmer, more restful state. The sun lowers, not quickly, but with the same steady patience that has shaped the entire day, its light stretching longer across touching the walls at new angles, creating shadows that lengthen and drift, slowly reaching across the open spaces between homes. These shadows move without sound, without urgency. And those who notice them do so quietly, without naming the change, simply feeling it as part of the day's natural rhythm. A man stands near the edge of the village, his gaze directed outward, his body still, his hands resting loosely at his sides, and for a moment he does nothing at all, simply watching as the light shifts across the land before him. He does not think of the time. He does not measure how far the day has gone. He only stands. And in that stillness, time continues. Nearby, a woman steps outside her home, pausing just beyond the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the softer light, her body settling into the cooler air, and she looks out across the space before her, not searching for anything, but simply allowing her gaze to rest where it will. After a moment, she moves again, her steps slow, her movements quiet, as she begins to prepare for what will come next, though even this preparation is not rushed, not urgent, but guided by the same calm familiarity that has carried her through every part of the day. Children move nearby, their presence light, their steps unhurried, their attention drifting gently between the small details that surround them, though now their movements feel softer, quieter, as if the fading light has settled into them as well. One child crouches low to the, tracing slow lines in the dust with a small stick, watching how the marks appear and remain, his movements steady, his focus calm. Another stands nearby, watching the sky, where the color has begun to change, the bright blue softening into deeper tones, though still carrying the warmth of the day. They do not speak. They do not call out. They simply remain where they are, observing, existing within the moment without needing anything more. A group of men return once again from the fields, their steps steady, their bodies relaxed, their work complete for now, and as they walk through the village, their presence blends into the quiet movement that surrounds them, their voices low, their words few. They do not speak to fill the space. They allow the space to hold them. As they reach their homes, they pause briefly, just as before, standing for a moment before entering, their bodies shifting from the rhythm of work into the softer rhythm of evening. Inside, tools are set down gently. Hands are freed. Bodies rest. Outside, the breeze carries a slightly cooler touch now, moving more freely through the village, brushing against skin, lifting the edges of fabric, carrying faint scents that linger from the day's work and the earth itself. The woman who had stepped outside earlier now sits near the entrance of her home, her hands moving slowly as she begins to prepare food once more, her actions steady, familiar, unhurried. She shapes, arranges, adjusts. Each movement simple. Each moment quiet. Nearby, another sits beside her, watching for a while before beginning her own small task, their presence shared without the need for constant conversation. When they do speak, their voices are soft, their words slow, separated by pauses that feel natural, unforced, allowing silence to remain where it belongs. A child leans against the wall nearby, his body relaxed, his eyes drifting between the movements of the women and the shifting light across his awareness calm, his energy fading gently as the day draws closer to its end. The sounds of the village change subtly. The rhythm softens. The tone lowers. Movements grow fewer, more deliberate, as if each action carries a quiet awareness that the day is nearing its close. A man sits just outside his home, his posture relaxed, his gaze directed outward, though not fixed on anything in particular, and for a long moment, he remains still, simply watching the space before him, noticing the small movements, the changing light, the quiet presence of others nearby. He does not think deeply. He does not plan. He simply sits. And in that sitting, time passes. The sky continues to shift, the colors deepening slowly, the brightness fading, replaced by softer tones that stretch across the horizon, signaling the quiet arrival of evening. No one announces it. No one needs to. It is felt. In the air. In the light. In the slowing of movement. Food continues to be prepared, though still without hurry, the actions unfolding calmly, guided by habit and familiarity rather than by time. Children grow quieter, their earlier curiosity settling into stillness, their bodies relaxing as they remain close to their homes, their attention no longer drawn outward, but inward, toward rest. Voices remain soft, their tone unchanged, their presence gentle, blending into the calm that fills every part of the village. A woman finishes her task and sets her hands in her lap, her gaze lifting outward for a moment, her body still, her breathing slow, as if she is allowing the final part of the day to settle fully around her before moving again. Nearby, a man leans back slightly, his eyes lifting toward the sky, where the first faint signs of evening begin to appear, though the stars are not yet visible, the light not yet gone. Everything remains in between. Between day and night. Between movement and rest. Between sound and silence. And in this quiet in-between, time continues to move, gently and steadily, carrying the village forward without effort, without urgency, toward the calm and familiar stillness that will soon return once more. The evening arrives not as a sudden change, but as a quiet deepening of everything that has already begun, where the light softens further, the cools gently, and the movements of the village become slower, more measured, as if each action is being carefully placed into the final hours of the day. The sun lowers closer to the horizon now, its glow stretching across the land in long, warm lines that touch the walls of the homes, and the figures who move quietly within the village, casting shadows that lengthen and blend together, soft and unbroken. There is a calm in this light. A quiet warmth that feels different from the morning, different from midday. More settled. More complete. People remain close to their homes, their tasks lighter now, their movements fewer, as the day gently releases its hold on activity and shifts toward rest. The woman preparing the evening meal continues her work with slow, steady hands, turning, arranging, adjusting, her attention calm, her breathing even, her presence grounded in each small movement. There is no urgency in finishing. No pressure to hurry. The food will be ready when it is ready. Nearby, another woman sits quietly, her hands resting in her lap for a moment before she reaches again for a small task, her movements unhurried, her gaze soft, occasionally drifting outward toward the fading light. Children sit close by, their energy now low, their bodies relaxed, their voices quiet or absent altogether, as if the day has gently carried them toward stillness without effort. One child leans against the wall, his head tilted slightly, his eyes half closed, listening to the soft sounds around him, the low voices, the faint movements, the quiet presence of others nearby, and in that listening, he drifts closer to sleep. Another sits on the, tracing slow, absent patterns in the dust, not focused on what he creates, but simply moving his hand in a steady, repetitive way, watching the marks appear and fade without thought. These small actions fill the final moments of the day. Not with excitement, but with quiet completion. A man returns from the edge of the village, his step steady, his posture relaxed, his hands empty now, his work already behind him, and as he walks, he glances gently around, taking in the familiar sight of the homes, the people, the light as it fades. He pauses near his doorway, just for a moment, standing still before entering, his body adjusting, his breath slowing, as if marking the quiet transition from the outer space of the day into the inner space of evening. Inside, he sits, his hands resting loosely, his gaze lowered, allowing himself to settle fully into the calm that surrounds him. Outside, the breeze moves softly through the village, carrying a cooler touch now, brushing gently against skin, lifting the edges of cloth, moving quietly through the spaces between homes without disturbance. The sounds of the village remain low and steady, though fewer now, as conversations become softer, shorter, and more spaced, their presence fading naturally without effort. When people speak, their voices are calm, their words simple, their tone unchanging, as if the quiet of the evening shapes not only what is said, but how it is said. Between these words, silence grows. Not empty, but full, holding the space gently. The sky above begins to deepen, the bright tones of the day fading into softer hues, the blue growing darker, the edges of the horizon shifting into colors that slowly dissolve into night. A man sits outside, his back resting against the wall, his legs stretched before him, his gaze lifting upward, following the slow change in the sky, watching as the light thins, as the first faint star begins to appear. He does not move. He does not speak. He simply watches. And in that watching, time passes quietly. The evening meal is shared in the same calm way as always, without structure, without ceremony, each person taking what they need, sitting where they are comfortable, eating slowly, without distraction. The act of eating is not rushed. Each bite is taken gently. Each moment allowed to remain. There is no sense of needing to finish quickly. The day has already given what it needed to give. This is simply its closing. Children grow quieter still, some already asleep where they sit or lie, their bodies relaxed, their breathing soft, their rest coming naturally, without resistance, as if the entire day has gently carried them into this moment. Others remain awake for a little while longer, though their attention drifts, their eyes growing heavy, their movements slowing until they too settle into stillness. The adults remain seated or reclined, their conversations fading, their presence calm, their awareness soft, as if the quiet of the night is already beginning to settle within them. The breeze continues, though softer now, its movement barely noticeable, its presence felt more than heard. The village grows still once more. Not suddenly, but gradually. As voices fall silent. As movements cease. As the light fades completely. The sky is now dark, filled once again with stars that shine clearly, their presence constant, their quiet light stretching across the vastness above. On the rooftops, some have already lain down, their bodies stretched beneath the open sky, their eyes either closed or softly gazing upward, their breathing slow, their thoughts drifting without direction. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to fill. The day has come to its end in the same way it began, quietly, gently, without urgency. And in this stillness, time continues once more, moving softly through the night, carrying the village into rest, where everything becomes calm again, where nothing is required, and where the steady rhythm of life remains, quiet and unbroken, waiting patiently for the slow return of morning. The night settles once more over the village, not as a covering that arrives from above, but as a quiet deepening that rises from within everything, softening the edges of sound, dimming the outlines of shapes, and drawing all movement gently inward toward rest. The air cools further now, carrying a softness that was absent during the day, a calm that moves slowly through the open spaces, across the rooftops, through the narrow paths between homes, touching everything without being noticed directly. The village lies still. Not empty, but at rest. The sounds that remain are small and distant, the faint shift of someone turning in sleep, the quiet breath of moving across surfaces, the steady, endless flow of the Nile continuing beyond sight, unchanged by the passing of hours. Above, the sky stretches wide and clear, filled with stars that shine steadily, their light small yet constant, scattered across the darkness in a way that feels both distant and close at the same time. On the rooftops, figures lie beneath this sky, their bodies relaxed, their breathing slow and even, their thoughts no longer held by the rhythm of the day, but drifting gently, without direction, without weight. A man lies on his back, his hands resting loosely beside him, his eyes open for a moment, gazing upward at the stars, not searching for patterns, not naming what he sees, but simply allowing his gaze to rest in the quiet vastness above. There is no need to think. No need to hold anything in place. The moment exists fully on its own. After a while, his eyes close, not suddenly, but slowly, as if the darkness itself has drawn them shut, and sleep comes to him without effort, without interruption, carrying him into the same calm rest that holds the entire village. Nearby, another remains awake for a little longer, his body still, his breath steady, his awareness soft, not focused on anything in particular, but gently moving between the sounds and sensations of the night. He hears the faint rustle of leaves, the distant movement of water, the quiet presence of others sleeping nearby. These small details pass through his awareness without staying, like the breeze that touches and moves on. Eventually, his thoughts fade. His body softens further, and sleep takes him as well. Hours pass in this way. Uncounted. Unmeasured. The night continues, steady and unchanged, holding everything within its quiet stillness. The river flows. The air shifts. The stars move slowly across the sky. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is forced. Everything simply continues. Then, as before, the darkness begins to ease. Not in a sudden change, but in a gradual softening, where the deepest shades of night begin to lighten, where the stars slowly fade, where the air carries a different kind of stillness, the kind that belongs to early morning. On the rooftops, small movements begin again. A hand shifts. A breath deepens. Eyes open slowly. The man who had fallen asleep beneath the stars wakes gently, his body returning to awareness without effort, his gaze lifting once more toward the sky, now lighter, now softer, as the first signs of dawn begin to appear. He does not rise immediately. Instead, he remains still for a moment, allowing himself to fully enter the new day, not through action, but through quiet awareness. The air is cooler now. Fresh. Calm. He takes a slow breath, feeling it fill his chest, then release just as slowly, and after a while, he sits up, his movements unhurried, his body at ease. Around him, others begin to wake as well, their movements soft, their presence gentle, as if the entire village is returning to life in one slow, continuous motion. There is no sound to mark the beginning. No signal. Only the quiet rhythm that guides everything forward. A woman steps outside her home once more, the clay jar in her hands, its surface cool in the early air, and she pauses, just as she always does, looking toward the river, her gaze calm, her thoughts unspoken. This moment repeats. And yet, it does not feel repeated. It feels complete. She begins her walk, her step steady, the path familiar beneath her feet, and along the way she passes others who are doing the same, their presence quiet, their movements unhurried. At the river, the water reflects the soft light of dawn, its surface calm, its motion steady, unchanged by the passing of night. She kneels, lowering the jar into the water, watching as it fills, the ripples spreading outward in gentle circles. Nearby, the young boy stands again, his small container in his hands, his attention already drifting toward the movement of the water, toward the light, toward the quiet patterns that unfold before him. No one calls him. No one rushes him. He remains, watching. And in that watching, time begins again. The village slowly fills with movement once more, though it remains gentle, steady, unhurried, as if nothing has truly ended, and nothing has truly begun. It is all part of the same quiet flow. The same rhythm. The same steady passing of time. Inside the homes, the grinding stones return. Outside, tools are lifted again. Children sit, wander, observe. The light grows stronger. The warmth begins to return. And once again, without announcement, without urgency, the day unfolds, carrying everyone gently forward into the familiar pattern of living, where time is not something to be chased or filled, but something that exists quietly within each moment, waiting only to be lived. The morning unfolds once more with the same quiet certainty, as if it has been waiting patiently to return, bringing with it the familiar light, the gentle warmth, and the steady rhythm that shapes every movement within the village. The air, still cool from the night, carries a softness that lingers briefly before the sun begins to rise higher, and in this early moment, everything feels open and calm, as though the day has not yet asked anything of those who have awakened. The woman who returned from the river sets her jar down in its place, her hands steady, her movements practiced, and as she releases it, she allows herself a brief pause, standing still, her gaze resting lightly on the space before her. This pause is not empty. It is part of the beginning. Inside another home, the grinding stone begins again, its slow, steady sound returning as naturally as the light itself, marking the passage of time without effort, without demand. The woman who works there leans slightly into the motion, her hands guiding the stone in a rhythm that feels almost like breathing, her attention calm, her thoughts quiet. Beside her, the child watches once more, though now her gaze drifts more easily, moving between the task and the light that enters through the doorway, forming soft shapes that shift across the. She follows these shapes without thinking, her awareness gentle, her presence relaxed. Outside, the man who had rested beneath the sky steps down from the roof, his feet touching with a quiet familiarity, his body moving without hesitation into the space of the new day. He does not rush. He does not look ahead to what must be done. He simply moves. Around him, the village begins to fill with soft activity, each person finding their place within the rhythm, not through planning, but through habit, through memory, through the quiet understanding of what each day brings. A group of women walk again toward the river, their jars balanced with ease, their steps steady, their voices low and spaced with silence, their conversation drifting gently between them without urgency. They speak for a moment. Then they are quiet. Then they speak again. The pattern continues. Unforced. Natural. Near the edge of the village, a child crouches close to watching as a small insect moves slowly across the dust, its path uncertain, its movement delicate, and the child leans closer, his attention calm, his curiosity steady. He does not reach out. He does not interrupt. He simply watches. And in that watching, time stretches softly. The sun rises higher, its light growing stronger, though still gentle, touching the surfaces of the village with a steady warmth that begins to settle into the walls, into the air itself. People continue their tasks, though always with the same quiet pace, the same absence of urgency, as if the day itself moves through them rather than being pushed forward by their actions. The man who had shaped wood returns to his place, his hands lifting the tool once more, his fingers finding their position without thought, and he continues, not from the beginning, but from where he left off, his movement steady, his attention calm. Nearby, a woman sits with a piece of fabric, her hands moving slowly as she repairs it, her focus soft, her posture relaxed, and occasionally she looks up, her gaze drifting outward before returning gently to her work. Children move through the spaces between homes, their steps light, their attention wandering, drawn to small details, the pattern of the dust, the movement of a shadow, the sound of something shifting nearby. They do not seek to fill time. They exist within it. The sounds of the village grow slightly as the morning continues, though they remain soft, blending together into a steady background, the grinding of stone, the movement of feet, the low murmur of voices, the occasional call of an animal. None of these sounds rise sharply. None demand attention. They simply exist. A man walks slowly along the edge of the village, his gaze drifting, his awareness open, and as he moves, he notices the same familiar details, the texture of the beneath his feet, the shape of the homes, the distant line of green where the river flows. Nothing is new. And yet, everything feels complete. As the morning deepens, the warmth increases, settling gradually over everything, encouraging a slower pace, a softer movement, a quiet acceptance of the rhythm that the day brings. The woman at the grinding stone adjusts her motion slightly, her hands moving a little more slowly, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed, and the sound continues, soft and even, marking the passage of time without interruption. The child beside her shifts position, now lying down, her eyes following the movement of light as it changes across her attention drifting gently, her body relaxed. Outside, the man pauses once more, his hands resting, his gaze lifting toward the sky, and for a moment, he does nothing at all. This moment, like all the others, is part of the day. Not separate. Not empty. But full in its stillness. The breeze moves softly through the village, carrying with it the faint scent of the river, touching the skin, lifting the edges of cloth, reminding those who feel it of the quiet movement that continues beyond sight. The day moves forward. Steadily. Gently. Without demand. And as the sun climbs higher, as the warmth deepens, as the sounds soften once more, the village begins to lean again toward the quiet stillness of midday, where movement will slow, where rest will return, and where time will stretch wide and calm, just as it has before, just as it will again. And in this steady, unbroken rhythm, life continues, not filled with distraction, but with the simple, quiet presence of each moment as it comes and gently passes. As the morning gently gives way once more to the slow approach of midday, the light becomes fuller, settling more deeply across the village, while the warmth gathers gradually, not in a sudden wave, but in a quiet, steady way that touches everything evenly. The begins to feel heavier again, though not uncomfortable, only present, encouraging the same natural slowing that has come before, guiding the body towards softer movements, longer pauses, and a quieter pace. The woman at the grinding stone continues her steady rhythm, though her hands now move slightly more slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her breath even, her attention calm and unfixed, as if the task itself has become part of her without requiring effort. The sound of the stone remains soft, constant, unchanging. Beside her, the child has settled fully onto her body relaxed, her eyes half closed as she watches the shifting light, her thoughts drifting gently, not held by anything in particular. She does not ask for something to do. She does not seek to fill the moment. She simply remains. Outside, the man who had been shaping wood places his tool down once more, his hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze softening as he leans back slightly, allowing the warmth of the day to settle into his body. He closes his eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, but to rest. The pause comes naturally, without decision. Around him, others begin to do the same. The movements of the village grow fewer. The sounds soften further. Voices fade into quiet or disappear altogether. A stillness begins to spread, slowly, gently, like a shadow that extends without being seen. Near the river, fewer figures remain now, the early tasks already completed, the water continuing its steady flow without interruption, its surface reflecting the bright light above. A man stands there for a moment, his gaze lowered, his hands resting at his sides, and after a short pause, he turns and walks back toward the village, his steps unhurried, his presence quiet. There is nothing left to gather. Nothing that needs to be done here now. Back among the homes, a woman sits beneath a shaded covering, her hands occupied with a small task, perhaps mending or arranging, her movements slow and careful, her attention gentle. Beside her, another sits without working, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze drifting outward, watching the open space where the light now feels stronger, more settled. They do not speak. They do not need to. The silence between them is enough. A child walks slowly across his feet leaving faint marks in the dust, which remain for a moment before softening under the movement of the breeze, and he watches this quietly, noticing how quickly the surface returns to its smoothness. He steps again. And again. Each time pausing to see what remains. This simple act holds him fully. And in that stillness of attention, time stretches softly. The warmth continues to deepen, settling into the walls, the ground, the air, until it becomes part of everything, encouraging rest, guiding the body towards stillness without force. Inside one home, the woman who had been working with fabric sets it aside, her hands coming to rest, her body leaning back gently against the wall, her eyes softening as she allows herself to pause. Her breathing slows. Her shoulders relax. She does not think of what remains to be done. The moment is complete. Nearby, the child beside her has already drifted into sleep, her small form still, her face calm, her breath quiet and even. Outside, the man who had been resting now lies down fully, stretching out along the shaded ground, his arm beneath his head, his body settling into stillness without resistance. Others follow in their own way. Some lie down. Some sit quietly. Some remain awake but still. The village grows hushed once more. Not empty, but deeply calm. The sounds that remain are soft and distant, the faint movement of, the quiet shift of someone adjusting their position, the far-off call of a bird carried gently through the air. Even the animals seem to rest, their movements slower, their presence quieter. The entire place feels as though it has softened again, like a long breath held gently in place. Time continues to pass. But it feels wider now. Less defined. Each moment blending into the next without edges. The light above begins, very slowly, to change. At first, it is almost impossible to notice. But it is there. A slight shift. A softening. The sun has begun its slow descent once more. The warmth remains, but its weight begins to ease, just enough to be felt. And with that change, small movements begin again. A hand shifts. An eye opens. A breath deepens. The woman inside the home straightens slightly, her hands moving once more, not immediately returning to work, but adjusting, preparing, her body remembering the rhythm it will soon rejoin. Outside, the man who had been lying down lifts himself slowly, brushing dust from his arm, his gaze unfocused for a moment before settling. No one rushes. No one begins all at once. The return is gradual. Gentle. As the village slowly rises from its midday stillness and moves once again into the quiet, steady flow of the afternoon. The sounds return. Soft. Unobtrusive. The movements follow. Measured. Calm. And just like that, without any clear beginning, the day continues forward once more, carried by the same unbroken rhythm, where time does not demand to be filled, but simply unfolds, moment by moment, in quiet, endless continuity. The afternoon returns once again in the same quiet, unhurried way, as if it has never truly left, but only rested beneath the stillness of midday, waiting to rise again with the soft shift of light and air. The warmth begins to ease, though it remains present, now gentler, more balanced, allowing movement to return without strain, allowing the body to respond naturally, without resistance. Across the village, people begin to move again in small, gradual ways, their actions soft, their presence calm, as if each person is stepping back into the rhythm of the day without needing to think about it. The woman at the grinding stone lifts her hands once more, her fingers settling into their familiar place, and she resumes the steady motion, the sound returning as it always does, quiet and even, blending seamlessly into the soft background of the afternoon. Beside her, the child who had been resting now sits up slowly, her eyes still soft with sleep, her awareness returning gently, and for a moment she remains still, simply looking, taking in the space around her without urgency. Outside, the man who had been lying beneath the shade now stands, stretching slightly, his body loosening as he shifts back into movement, his hands brushing lightly against his clothing, removing the fine dust that has settled there. He pauses briefly, his gaze lifting toward the open space of the village, noticing the change in light, the soft return of sound, the quiet movement of others around him. Then, without hurry, he steps forward. The afternoon begins to take shape again. Not as something new, but as a continuation of what has always been. Men return to the fields or remain near the village, their tasks simple, their movement steady, their attention calm, as if each action is guided not by time, but by familiarity. Women continue their work, preparing, mending, arranging, their hands moving with quiet precision, their thoughts unburdened, their presence grounded in the moment. Children move once more through the spaces between homes, their steps light, their curiosity gentle, drawn to small things that shift and change around them. One child watches as the shadow of a wall stretches slowly across following its movement with quiet attention, stepping into it, then out again, noticing the difference in warmth beneath his feet. Another crouches low, examining a small object in the dust, turning it over in his fingers, feeling its surface, its weight, its shape, as if each detail holds something worth noticing. There is no rush. No demand. Only presence. The breeze moves more freely now, passing through the village in soft currents that lift the edges of cloth, stir the dust lightly, and carry faint scents from the river and the beyond. A man pauses as the breeze touches his face, his eyes closing briefly, his breath slowing, his awareness settling into the moment. Then, gently, he continues. The light continues its slow descent, though still strong enough to illuminate everything clearly, casting long, soft shadows that stretch across shifting almost imperceptibly as time moves forward. The sounds of the village remain low and steady, a soft blend of movement, of quiet voices, of tools and hands at work, never rising sharply, never disturbing the calm. A group of women sit together once more, their tasks light, their conversation soft, drifting in and out of silence with ease. One speaks. Another listens. Then there is a pause. And in that pause, nothing feels missing. Nearby, a child leans back against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his eyes half closed as he listens without focusing, his awareness drifting between the voices and the gentle movement of the breeze. The afternoon stretches on, not marked by sudden change, but by slow, steady shifts, the light softening, the air cooling, the shadows lengthening. A man returns from the edge of the village, his step steady, his posture relaxed, his presence blending into the quiet rhythm of the place, and as he reaches his home, he pauses briefly, standing still for a moment before stepping inside. Inside, he sits, his hands resting loosely, his gaze lowered, his breathing steady, allowing himself to settle into the calm of the space. Outside, the breeze continues, carrying the subtle signs of the day's turning, though no one speaks of it, no one marks the change, because it does not need to be named. It is felt. In the light. In the slowing of movement. Children grow quieter again, their energy softening as the day moves toward its later hours, their actions becoming fewer, their attention drifting more easily into stillness. A woman finishes her task and sets it aside, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze lifting outward for a moment as she takes in the space before her. She does not move. She simply sits. And in that sitting, time continues. The sky begins to shift once more, the brightness fading slightly, the tones deepening, the warmth softening into something more gentle, more settled. Evening is not yet here. But it is near. And in this quiet approach, the village remains calm, balanced between movement and rest, carried forward by the same steady rhythm that has shaped every moment, where time flows without effort, without urgency, and without end. The afternoon leans further into its quiet descent, and the light begins to take on a softer, warmer tone, as if the sun is gently loosening its hold on the land, allowing everything to settle into a calmer, more restful state. The feels lighter now, moving more easily through the village, carrying with it a faint coolness that was not present before, touching the skin in a way that feels subtle but noticeable, like a quiet shift that does not need to be named. People continue their work, though their movements grow even slower, even more measured, as if each action is being carefully placed into the final hours of the day. The woman at the grinding stone completes her motion and pauses, her hands resting briefly before she begins again, the rhythm softer now, less constant, as the need for the task fades into the background. Nearby, the child who had been watching her earlier now sits quietly, her attention drifting between the movement of the stone and the changing light that stretches across her awareness gentle, her thoughts unformed. Outside, the man who had returned from rest walks slowly along the edge of the village, his steps unhurried, his gaze soft, noticing the subtle changes around him, the lengthening shadows, the shifting color of the sky, the quieter movements of others. He does not stop these changes. He does not follow them. He simply observes. And in that observation, time continues to pass. A group of men return from the fields once more, their tools resting lightly in their hands, their bodies relaxed, their steps steady, their presence blending quietly into the calm of the village. They do not speak much. Their voices, when they rise, are low and brief, fading easily back into silence. As they reach their homes, they pause as they always do, standing for a moment before entering, their bodies adjusting from the open space of the land to the closer, quieter space of the village. Inside, tools are set down gently. Hands rest. Bodies ease into stillness. Near the homes, women begin to prepare for the evening meal once again, their movements familiar, their actions unhurried, guided not by time, but by the quiet understanding of what comes next. They gather what they need. They arrange. They shape. Each motion steady. Each moment calm. Children remain close, their earlier movement now softened into stillness, their bodies relaxed, their attention quiet, as if the day has gently guided them toward rest without needing to say so. One child leans against a wall, his eyes half closed, listening to the soft sounds around him, the faint murmur of voices, the movement of hands, the gentle shifting of. Another sits nearby, drawing slow patterns in the dust, his hand moving without thought, his attention not fixed on what he creates, but simply on the movement itself. The breeze continues, now carrying a slightly cooler touch, moving through the village in soft, quiet currents, lifting the edges of cloth, brushing against carrying faint scents that linger from the day. A man sits outside his home, his back resting lightly against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his gaze directed outward, though not focused on anything in particular. He watches as the village moves in small, quiet ways, as the light continues to fade, as the shadows stretch and soften. He does not speak. He does not move. He simply remains. And in that stillness, time passes. The sky above begins to change more clearly now, the bright tones of the afternoon giving way to deeper colors, the blue softening, warming, then slowly darkening as the sun lowers closer to the horizon. No one announces this change. No one marks it. It is felt. In the light. In the air. In the quiet slowing of everything. The sounds of the village grow softer still, conversations fading into brief exchanges, then into silence, movements becoming fewer, more deliberate, as if each action is part of a quiet closing. A woman finishes preparing the meal and sets her hands in her lap for a moment, her gaze lifting outward, her body still, her breath slow, as if she is allowing the final light of the day to settle fully around her. Nearby, a man lifts his gaze toward the sky, watching as the first faint star begins to appear, its light small but steady against the fading blue. He does not point. He does not speak. He simply notices. The evening approaches. Not suddenly, but gently, carried on the same steady rhythm that has guided the entire day. Children grow quieter still, some resting where they sit, their bodies relaxed, their breathing soft, their awareness fading as sleep begins to draw closer. Others remain awake, though their attention drifts, their movements slowing until they too settle into stillness. The adults remain seated or reclined, their presence calm, their voices soft or silent, their awareness gently turning inward as the day comes to its close. The breeze softens. The light fades. The shadows blend into one. And the village, once again, begins to settle into the quiet, familiar stillness of evening, where time continues not through action, but through rest, through presence, through the gentle fading of the day into night. The evening deepens slowly, as if the light itself is gently folding into the horizon, leaving behind a softness that settles over the village without disturbance, without sound. The last warmth of the day lingers in and along the walls, though the now carries a cooler touch, moving quietly through the open spaces, brushing against skin with a calm, steady presence. The sky continues its quiet transformation, the remaining light fading into deeper tones, the first stars appearing one by one, small and distant, yet clear in the growing darkness. No one rushes this change. No one marks the moment when day becomes night. It happens gradually, as everything else does. The woman who had prepared the meal now sits with others nearby, her hands resting loosely, her body relaxed, her gaze soft as she shares the quiet presence of those around her. The food is taken slowly, without ceremony, without structure, each person eating in their own time, their movements calm, their attention unhurried. There are few words. And when they are spoken, they are gentle, low, spaced with long pauses that allow silence to remain. A child leans against her, already drifting into sleep, her small body heavy with rest, her breathing slow and even, her awareness fading softly into the quiet of the night. Nearby, another child lies his head resting on his arm, his eyes half closed as he listens to the faint sounds around him, the movement of hands, the soft murmur of voices, the quiet shifting of. These sounds do not hold him. They pass through him. And soon, he too sleeps. A man sits just outside his home, his posture relaxed, his gaze lifting occasionally toward the sky, where more stars have begun to appear, their light steady and calm. He watches for a while. Not searching. Not thinking. Simply allowing his eyes to rest on the quiet pattern above. Then, slowly, he lowers his gaze, his attention returning to the stillness around him. Inside the homes, movement becomes minimal. Hands rest. Bodies settle. Voices fade. The tasks of the day have come to their natural end, not through completion alone, but through the quiet understanding that nothing more is needed. The breeze continues to move softly, though its presence is now lighter, more subtle, as if even the air has begun to quiet itself. The village grows still. Not all at once. but gradually. As each person settles, as each movement ceases, as each sound fades into the background. On the rooftops, some begin to lie down once more, their bodies stretching out beneath the open sky, their heads resting, their eyes either closing or drifting upward to the stars. The ground below cools slowly, releasing the warmth it held through the day, creating a gentle balance in the air that feels calm and steady. A man lies on his back, his hands resting at his sides, his breath slow, his chest rising and falling in a quiet rhythm that matches the stillness around him. For a moment, his eyes remain open, watching the sky, following no particular star, holding no particular thought. Then, without effort, his eyes close. Sleep comes gently. Nearby, another remains awake a little longer, his body still, his awareness soft, noticing the faint sounds of the night, the distant flow of water, the quiet movement of, the subtle presence of others resting nearby. These sounds do not disturb him. They hold him. And slowly, his awareness fades as well. The night settles fully now, deep and calm, wrapping the village in a quiet that feels complete, uninterrupted, and steady. Time continues to move. But it does not need to be noticed. It moves through the breath, through the slow shifting of the air, through the quiet passing of stars across the sky. Hours drift by, uncounted, unmeasured. The village remains at rest. Then, as before, the darkness begins to soften. Almost imperceptibly. The stars lose a little of their brightness. The sky begins to lighten, not with color yet, but with a subtle shift that signals the quiet return of morning. On the rooftops, small movements begin again. A hand shifts. A breath deepens. Eyes open slowly. The man who had been lying beneath the stars stirs gently, his body returning to awareness without effort, his gaze lifting toward the sky, now lighter, now softer. He does not rise immediately. He remains still for a moment, allowing the new day to arrive around him. The air is cool, fresh, calm. He breathes slowly, deeply. Then, after a while, he sits up, his movements unhurried, his posture relaxed. Around him, others begin to wake as well, their presence returning in quiet, gradual ways, as if the entire village is rising together in one slow, continuous motion. There is no beginning. No signal. Only the rhythm. The same rhythm that has always been. A woman steps outside once more, the jar in her hands, its surface cool, its weight familiar, and she pauses, just as she always does, her gaze resting briefly on the space before her. Then she walks toward the river. The path remains the same. The water remains the same. The morning begins again. And with it, time continues, not as something new, but as the quiet continuation of everything that has already been, flowing gently forward without interruption, without urgency, without end. The morning returns once again, not as a beginning that replaces what came before, but as a quiet continuation, unfolding gently from the fading darkness, carrying with it the same soft light, the same calm, and the same steady rhythm that has guided every moment. The village wakes slowly. Not all at once, but in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A shift of movement here. A soft breath there. The light grows gradually, touching the walls, the narrow paths between homes, revealing once more the simple shapes that rest quietly in their familiar places. The woman who has walked to the river kneels again at its edge, lowering her jar into the water, watching as it fills, the surface rippling gently outward, the motion soft and steady. She does not rush. She does not pause for long. Her movements follow a rhythm that does not need to be thought about. Nearby, others do the same, their presence quiet, their actions unhurried, their attention calm. There are a few soft words exchanged. Then silence returns. The river flows. Unchanged. Back in the village, the grinding stone begins once more, its sound returning as naturally as the light itself, low and steady, marking the passage of the early hours without effort. The woman who works there leans slightly into the motion, her hands guiding the stone in a slow, even rhythm, her breathing steady, her thoughts quiet. Beside her, the child watches again, though her attention drifts easily, moving between the movement of the stone and the soft light that enters through the doorway, forming patterns that shift across the. She follows these patterns with her eyes, not because she is told to, but because they are there. And that is enough. Outside, the man who had rested beneath the open sky steps into the space of the morning, his feet meeting the with quiet familiarity, his posture relaxed, his gaze soft. He looks around briefly, noticing the same details he has seen before, the shape of the homes, the movement of others, the distant line of the river, but he does not hold these observations. He allows them to pass. Then he moves. The village fills slowly with activity, though it remains gentle, steady, unhurried. A group of women walk along the path, their jars balanced, their steps even, their conversation soft, moving between words and silence without tension. They speak. Then pause. Then speak again. The pattern continues. Near the edge of the village, a child crouches low, watching as a small insect moves across the dust, its path uncertain, its motion delicate. He leans closer, his eyes focused but calm, his breath steady. He does not interrupt. He simply watches. And in that watching, time stretches quietly. The sun rises higher, its warmth beginning to settle once more across the land, touching everything with a gentle consistency that feels familiar and expected. People continue their tasks, their movements shaped by habit, by memory, by the quiet understanding of what each day brings. The man who had been shaping wood returns to his work, his hands finding their place without thought, his movements steady, his attention calm. He does not begin again. He continues. Nearby, a woman sits with a piece of fabric, her fingers moving slowly as she repairs it, her gaze occasionally lifting outward before returning softly to her work. Children move between spaces, their steps light, their attention drifting, drawn to the small details that surround them, the shifting light, the movement of dust, the faint sounds that rise and fade. They do not seek to fill time. They exist within it. The sounds of the village remain low and steady, blending together into a quiet background, the grinding of stone, the movement of feet, the soft murmur of voices. Nothing rises sharply. Nothing interrupts the calm. A man walks slowly along the edge of the village once more, his gaze drifting, his awareness open, noticing the texture of the beneath his feet, the way the light rests against the walls, the faint movement of others nearby. He does not linger on these things. He does not analyze them. he simply notices. The morning deepens gradually, the warmth increasing, the light growing stronger, the pace of movement softening in response, as the village begins once again to lean toward the quiet stillness of midday. The woman at the grinding stone adjusts her rhythm slightly, her movements slowing, her posture relaxing, her breath steady. The child beside her shifts, lying down, her eyes following the light as it changes across her attention drifting gently. Outside, the man pauses once more, his hands resting, his gaze lifting toward the sky, and for a moment, he does nothing at all. This moment, like all the others, is part of the day. Not separate. Not empty. But full. The breeze moves softly through the village, carrying with it the faint scent of the river, touching the skin, lifting the edges of cloth, reminding those who feel it of the quiet movement that continues beyond sight. The day continues. Steadily. Gently. Without urgency. And as the sun climbs higher, as the warmth deepens, as the sounds soften once more, the village begins to settle again toward the calm, open stillness of midday, where movement will slow, where rest will return, and where time will stretch wide and quiet, just as it has before. And in this unbroken rhythm, life continues, simple and steady, where each moment flows into the next without resistance, without need, without end. The morning gradually leans once more toward midday, and the light settles more fully across the village, resting on and along the walls with a steady warmth that feels both familiar and expected, as if it has followed the same quiet path many times before. The grows still again, though not completely, only enough that each movement feels softer, each sound more contained, as if the day itself is gently drawing everything inward. The woman at the grinding stone continues her slow, even motion, though her hands now move with a slightly softer rhythm, guided by the growing warmth, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, her attention calm and unburdened. The sound remains. Low. Constant. A quiet marker of passing time. Beside her, the child lies on the once more, her body relaxed, her eyes half closed as she watches the shifting light, her awareness drifting between the movement of the stone and the patterns that form and fade across the surface before her. She does not hold her attention in one place. She allows it to move. Outside, the man who had been shaping wood places his tool down again, his fingers loosening, his hands resting lightly on his knees, and he leans back just enough to feel the wall behind him. His eyes close briefly. Not in sleep, but in rest. Around him, others begin to follow the same quiet pull toward stillness, their movements slowing, their tasks pausing, their presence softening as the warmth settles more deeply into the day. Near the river, the water continues its steady flow, though fewer people remain at its edge now, most having already gathered what they need, leaving the river to move quietly on its own. A man stands there for a moment, his gaze lowered, his thoughts unformed, and after a short while, he turns and walks back toward the village, his steps slow, his presence quiet. There is nothing more to do here for now. Back among the homes, a woman sits beneath a shaded covering, her hands moving slowly with a small task, her fingers careful, her posture relaxed, her attention gentle. Beside her, another sits without working, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze drifting outward, watching the open space where the light now feels stronger, more settled. They do not speak. The silence between them is shared. A child walks slowly across his steps leaving faint marks in the dust, and he pauses to watch how quickly they soften under the movement of. He steps again. Then pauses. Each small action holds his attention. And in that attention, time stretches quietly. The warmth continues to deepen, settling into everything, encouraging rest, guiding the body towards stillness without force. Inside one home, the woman who had been working sets her task aside, her hands coming to rest, her body leaning gently against the wall, her eyes softening as she allows herself to pause. Her breathing slows. Her thoughts quiet. Nearby, the child has already drifted into sleep, her small form still, her presence calm, her breath soft and even. Outside, the man who had been resting now lowers himself fully onto the shaded ground, his body stretching out, his arm beneath his head, his posture relaxed as he settles into stillness. Others do the same. Some lie down. Some sit quietly. Some remain awake but still. The village grows quiet once more. Not empty, but calm. The sounds that remain are faint, the movement of, the distant call of a bird, the quiet shifting of someone adjusting their position. Even the animals rest, their presence softened by the warmth of the day. Time continues. But it feels wider. Less defined. Each moment blending into the next without clear edges. The light above begins, very slowly, to shift. A subtle softening. A gentle change. The sun has begun its quiet descent again. The warmth remains, but its weight begins to ease, just enough to be felt. And with that change, small movements return. A hand lifts. Eyes open. Bodies adjust. The woman inside the home straightens slightly, her hands moving once more, not yet fully returning to work, but preparing, her body remembering its place within the rhythm. Outside, the man who had been lying down sits up slowly, brushing dust from his arm, his gaze unfocused for a moment before settling. No one rushes. No one begins all at once. The return is gradual. Gentle. As the village slowly rises from its midday stillness and moves again into the quiet flow of the afternoon. The sounds return. Softly. The movements follow. Steadily. And just as before, without any clear beginning or end, the day continues forward, carried by the same calm, unbroken rhythm, where time does not demand attention, but simply moves, quietly and endlessly, through every moment. The afternoon returns once more, unfolding gently from the quiet stillness of midday, as if it has been waiting patiently beneath the surface of the day, ready to rise again with the soft shift of light and the warmth begins to ease, not suddenly, but slowly, allowing movement to return without effort, allowing each person to step back into the rhythm of the day in their own quiet way. Across the village, small motions begin again. A hand lifts. A body shifts. Eyes open more fully. The woman at the grinding stone places her hands upon it once more, her fingers settling into their familiar position, and after a brief pause, she resumes the steady motion, the sound returning as it always does, low, even, and unbroken. Beside her, the child who had been resting now sits up, her eyes soft, her awareness still drifting, and for a moment she remains still, simply observing the space around her without any need to act. Outside, the man who had been lying beneath the shade now stands, brushing lightly at the dust on his clothing, his posture relaxed, his movements slow, as if he carries the quiet of rest with him even as he returns to motion. He looks out across the village, noticing the gentle return of activity, the shifting light, the soft movement of others. Then he steps forward. The afternoon takes shape again. Men move toward the fields or remain near the homes, their tasks simple, their actions steady, their attention calm. Women continue their work, preparing, mending, arranging, their hands moving with quiet familiarity, their thoughts unhurried, their presence grounded. Children move lightly between spaces, their steps soft, their attention drawn to small details, the stretch of a shadow, the movement of dust, the faint sound of something shifting nearby. One child follows the shadow of a wall as it lengthens across stepping into it, then out again, noticing the difference in warmth beneath his feet. Another crouches low, picking up a small stone, turning it slowly in his fingers, feeling its surface, its weight, its shape, as if these simple qualities are enough to hold his attention. There is no need for more. The breeze moves more freely now, passing through the village in soft currents that lift the edges of cloth, stir the dust gently, and carry faint scents from the river and the surrounding. A man pauses as the breeze touches his face, his eyes closing briefly, his breath slowing, his awareness settling into the moment. Then, quietly, he moves again. The light continues its slow descent, though still bright enough to illuminate the village clearly, casting long, soft shadows that stretch across shifting almost imperceptibly as time moves forward. The sounds remain low and steady, a quiet blending of footsteps, soft voices, the gentle rhythm of hands at work. Nothing rises sharply. Nothing disturbs the calm. A group of women sit together once more, their tasks light, their conversation soft, drifting between words and silence with ease. One speaks. Another listens. Then there is a pause. And in that pause, nothing feels incomplete. Nearby, a child leans back against a wall, his legs stretched before him, his eyes half closed, his attention drifting between the voices and the soft movement of the breeze. The afternoon stretches on, not marked by sudden changes, but by slow, steady shifts, the light softening, the air cooling, the shadows lengthening. A man returns from the edge of the village, his step steady, his posture relaxed, his presence blending quietly into the calm, and as he reaches his home, he pauses for a moment before entering, his body adjusting, his breath steady. Inside, he sits, his hands resting loosely, his gaze lowered, allowing himself to settle once more. Outside, the breeze continues, carrying the subtle signs of the day's turning, though no one speaks of it. It is felt. In the light. In the quiet slowing of movement. Children grow quieter again, their energy softening, their actions becoming fewer, their attention drifting gently towards stillness. A woman finishes her task and places it aside, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze lifting outward for a moment. She does not move. She simply sits. And in that stillness, time passes. The sky begins to change once more, the brightness fading, the tones deepening, the warmth softening into something more gentle. Evening is not yet here. But it is close. And in this quiet approach, the village remains calm, balanced between movement and rest, carried forward by the same steady rhythm that has guided every moment, where time flows softly, without urgency, without demand, and without end. The afternoon continues its slow and gentle descent, and the light begins to soften in a way that feels quieter than before, as if the day is slowly releasing its hold, allowing everything to settle into a calmer, more restful state. The carries a cooler touch now, moving more freely through the spaces between the homes, brushing lightly against, lifting the edges of cloth, and bringing with it a faint sense of ease that spreads gently through the village. People continue their tasks, though their movements grow softer, more measured, as if each action is being placed carefully into the final stretch of the day. The woman at the grinding stone slows her motion, her hands pausing more often now, the steady sound fading into longer moments of silence, as if the work itself is coming to a natural close. Beside her, the child sits quietly, her attention drifting between the fading rhythm of the stone and the long shadows that now stretch across her awareness calm, her thoughts light and unformed. Outside, the man who had been walking along the edge of the village continues his slow path, his steps unhurried, his gaze soft, taking in the subtle changes, the deepening colors of the sky, the lengthening shadows, the quieter movements of others. He does not stop these changes. He does not follow them. He simply remains within them. A group of men return once more from the fields, their tools resting easily in their hands, their bodies relaxed, their presence quiet, and as they pass through the village, their voices rise briefly in low tones before fading again into silence. They pause at their doorways, as they always do, standing for a moment before entering, their bodies shifting gently from the open space of work into the calm of evening. Inside, tools are set aside. Hands rest. Breath slows. Near the homes, women begin to prepare the evening meal, their movements familiar, their actions unhurried, guided by the quiet understanding of what comes next. They gather what they need. They arrange. They shape. Each movement steady. Each moment calm. Children remain close, their earlier movement now softened into stillness, their bodies relaxed, their attention quiet, as if the day has gently carried them toward rest without resistance. One child leans against a wall, his eyes half closed, listening to the soft sounds around him, the faint murmur of voices, the movement of hands, the quiet flow of. Another sits nearby, drawing slow, absent patterns in the dust, his hand moving without thought, his attention not fixed on what he creates, but simply on the motion itself. The breeze continues, now cooler, softer, moving through the village in gentle currents that bring a sense of calm to everything they touch. A man sits outside his home, his back resting against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his gaze directed outward, though not focused on anything in particular. He watches quietly. The movement of others. The shifting light. The long shadows that stretch across the. He does not speak. He does not move. He simply remains. The sky above begins to change more clearly now, the bright tones of the afternoon giving way to deeper colors, the blue softening, warming, then slowly fading as the sun lowers closer to the horizon. No one announces it. No one needs to. It is felt. In the light. In the air. In the quiet slowing of everything. The sounds of the village grow softer still, conversations fading into brief exchanges, then into silence, movements becoming fewer, more deliberate, as if each action is part of a quiet closing. A woman finishes preparing the meal and sets her hands in her lap, her gaze lifting outward, her body still, her breath slow, as if she is allowing the final light of the day to settle fully around her. Nearby, a man lifts his gaze toward the sky, watching as the first faint star appears, its light small but steady against the fading blue. He does not point. He does not speak. He simply notices. The evening approaches. Not suddenly, but gently, carried on the same steady rhythm that has shaped every moment. Children grow quieter still, some resting where they sit, their bodies relaxed, their breathing soft, their awareness fading as sleep begins to draw near. Others remain awake a little longer, though their attention drifts, their movements slowing until they too settle into stillness. The adults remain seated or reclined, their presence calm, their voices soft or silent, their awareness gently turning inward. The breeze softens. The light fades. The shadows blend into one. And the village, once again, begins to settle into the quiet, familiar stillness of evening, where time continues not through action, but through presence, through rest, through the gentle fading of the day into night. The evening settles more deeply now, as the last light of the day slowly fades into the horizon, leaving behind a softness that spreads across the village, quiet and undisturbed. That carries a cooler feeling, gentle and steady, moving through the narrow paths, across the rooftops, and along the where the warmth of the day still lingers faintly beneath the surface. The sky darkens gradually, the remaining color dissolving into deeper shades, while more stars begin to appear, one by one, their small lights steady against the growing. People remain close to their homes, their movements now minimal, their tasks nearly complete, as if the day has gently released them from its quiet demands. The woman who prepared the meal now sits with others nearby, her hands resting loosely, her posture relaxed, her gaze soft, sharing the calm presence of the evening. Food is taken slowly, without structure or urgency, each person eating in their own time, their movements gentle, their attention unburdened. There are few words. And when they come, they are soft, low, separated by long stretches of silence that feel full rather than empty. A child leans gently against her, already slipping into sleep, her small body heavy with rest, her breathing slow and even. Nearby, another child lies his head resting on his arm, his eyes half closed as he listens to the quiet sounds around him, the faint movement of hands, the soft murmur of voices, the subtle flow of. These sounds do not hold him. They pass through him. And soon, he too drifts into sleep. A man sits just outside his home, his back resting lightly against the wall, his legs stretched out before him, his gaze lifting now and then toward the sky, where the stars have become clearer, more numerous, their light steady and calm. He watches without thought, without effort. Then, slowly, his gaze lowers again, returning to the stillness around him. Inside the homes, movement fades almost completely. Hands rest. Bodies settle. Voices disappear. The tasks of the day have come to their natural end, not through completion alone, but through the quiet understanding that nothing more is needed. The continues to move softly, though its presence is now lighter, almost unnoticeable, as if even the air has quieted itself for the night. The village grows still. Not all at once, but gradually. As each person settles, as each movement fades, as each sound disappears into the calm. On the rooftops, some lie down once more beneath the open sky, their bodies stretched out, their heads resting, their eyes either closed or gently watching the stars above. The releases the last of its warmth slowly, creating a quiet balance in the air that feels steady and calm. A man lies on his back, his hands resting at his sides, his breathing slow, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that mirrors the stillness around him. For a moment, his eyes remain open, following no particular star, holding no particular thought. Then, without effort, they close. Sleep comes gently. Nearby, another remains awake for a little while longer, his awareness soft, noticing the faint sounds of the night, the distant movement of water, the quiet flow of, the subtle presence of others resting nearby. These sounds do not disturb him. They settle around him. And slowly, his awareness fades. The night deepens. Calm. Wide. Unbroken. Time continues to pass. But it does not need to be measured. It moves through breath. Through stillness. Through the slow movement of stars across the sky. Hours drift by in this quiet way. Unnoticed. Uncounted. The village remains at rest. Then, as before, the darkness begins to soften. Very slowly. Almost imperceptibly. The stars begin to fade. The sky lightens just enough to signal the quiet return of morning. On the rooftops, small movements begin again. A hand shifts. A breath deepens. Eyes open slowly. The man who had been lying beneath the stars stirs gently, his body returning to awareness without effort, his gaze lifting toward the sky, now softer, now lighter. He does not rise at once. He remains still for a moment, allowing the new day to arrive around him. The air is cool. Fresh. Calm. He breathes slowly. Deeply. Then, after a while, he sits up, his movements unhurried, his posture relaxed. Around him, others begin to wake as well, their presence returning in quiet, gradual ways, as if the entire village is rising together in one slow, continuous motion. There is no signal. No beginning. Only the rhythm. A woman steps outside once more, the jar in her hands, its surface cool, its weight familiar, and she pauses briefly, her gaze resting gently ahead. Then she walks. Toward the river. The path is the same. The water is the same. The morning begins again. And with it, time continues, flowing quietly and steadily, unbroken, carrying the village once more into the calm, familiar rhythm of another day. The morning begins again in the same quiet way, unfolding gently from the soft light of dawn, carrying with it the same steady rhythm that has never truly stopped, only continued, moment by moment, without interruption. The village wakes slowly, just as it always has. A small movement. A quiet breath. A figure rising softly from rest. Nothing feels new. And yet, nothing feels repeated. Everything simply continues. The woman walks once more toward the river, her jar resting against her side, her presence calm, and when she reaches the water, she kneels as she always does, lowering the jar slowly, watching the surface ripple outward in soft, widening circles. The river flows. Unchanged. Unhurried. Endless. She lifts the jar, holds it for a moment, then rises, turning back toward the village without pause, her movement part of the same quiet rhythm that carries everything forward. Inside the homes, the grinding stone begins again, its soft, steady sound returning like a familiar breath, low and even, marking time without needing to count it. Hands move. Bodies adjust. Light enters slowly through the doorways, forming gentle shapes along the shapes that shift without sound, without demand. A child watches these shapes, her eyes following their slow movement, her awareness soft, her thoughts unformed, drifting easily from one moment to the next. She does not ask for more. She does not seek to change what is. She simply remains. Outside, a man steps into the morning, his feet meeting the ground with quiet certainty, his gaze moving lightly across the village, noticing without holding, seeing without needing to understand. He walks slowly. Without direction. Without urgency. And in that walking, time passes. A group of women move along the path, their jars balanced, their voices low, their conversation flowing gently between words and silence, neither needing to fill the space, both existing together with ease. Children move quietly nearby, their steps light, their attention drawn to the smallest details, the movement of dust, the faint line of an insect, the soft shift of shadow across the. They watch. They follow. They pause. And in these simple acts, their time is full. The sun rises higher. The warmth returns. The day unfolds just as it always has, not as something that must be shaped, but as something that reveals itself slowly, gently, without effort. Work begins again, though it never truly ended. Hands return to familiar tasks. Bodies move in steady rhythms. Voices rise and fall softly, then fade. There is no rush to reach a moment. No need to escape one. Everything exists as it is. As the morning leans toward midday, the warmth deepens, the movement slow, the stillness returns, spreading gently across the village like a quiet, unseen presence. People rest. Some sleep. Some sit in silence. Some remain awake, their thoughts drifting, their awareness soft. The world does not demand anything from them. Time does not press forward. It simply moves. The sun lowers again. The light softens. The afternoon returns, then begins to fade. Evening follows, quiet and familiar, bringing with it the same gentle closing, the same soft voices, the same slow settling of bodies into rest. The night arrives. Stars fill the sky. The cools. The village becomes still once more. And then, slowly, almost without being noticed, the darkness begins to lift again. The stars fade. The light returns. The morning begins. Not as a new beginning, but as a continuation. The same river flows. The same rests beneath every step. The same hands move. The same breath rises and falls. Time passes in this way. Not filled with noise. Not shaped by distraction. But carried quietly within each moment. There are no grand events. No loud celebrations. No need for constant entertainment. Because the day itself is enough. The light. The movement. The stillness. The small, simple acts that return again and again, never demanding, never empty. And so life continues here, not as something that must be filled, but as something that simply unfolds, where time is not something to escape, but something to move within, gently and endlessly. The village remains quiet, steady, unchanged. The river flows. The stars return. The sun rises. And everything begins again. Softly. Calmly. Without end. Until the moments themselves grow so quiet, so gentle, that they no longer feel separate, but part of one long, unbroken stillness, where nothing is missing, nothing is needed, and everything simply rests, carried forward in the same slow rhythm, fading gently into the silence of another night, and the quiet promise of another day.